Audio, ladies and gentlemen, this is insane.
Oh my god, so insane. Insanity.
And we got visual. This is actually crazy.
Insanity, Spider-Man. Insanity.
Yeah, we're back doing this. Luckily YouTube remembers where we left off. We're about a third done with this gigantic video. We're gonna react to this EVE Online documentary video essay by Down
I
the
think
Rabbit
today we're
Hole.
just gonna let it play.
By Down the Rabbit Hole. Yeah, I don't think so.
We're just not gonna comment at all.
I feel like we're gonna want to comment on some things,
No.
yeah, we're here.
Let Freddie do his thing.
We are here, and oh shit.
And
hold on.
gay. We're very queer.
Yeah, it's true. I am gonna kiss you. It's true. I am destined to kiss you because I guessed Monster Hunter 6 being announced, so I do have to kiss you.
Yeah, good luck.
Are there any other announcements that you
I don't even remember. I didn't watch.
That's fair.
After that Metal Gear thing with Joe, I was like, oh, there's no Metal Gear Solid 6. Oh, no.
No, but Kojima
I
announced
went
like
to bed.
I know Death Stranding 2. When is that coming out actually?
Hmm.
Isn't that
I don't know, but did they do gameplay? Because they already announced that it was a thing.
They
They announced another game also. Kojima. I remember. Well, I didn't see it, but Joe told me they announced another game.
yeah, it was weird. Oh shit, hold on. Why'd I do that to myself?
Like Jordan Peele. Oh, Jesus Christ, that's loud, dude. What the fuck?
Sorry.
It got louder from last time.
Sorry. I literally had no choice.
Literally. Oh my god. Sugar nut.
Death Stranding 2, nothing was shown about it. It said it's Kojima's new game called OD,
Yeah.
which is like,
Yeah,
okay.
they didn't show anything about Death Stranding 2?
No. Death Stranding 2 working title. And yeah, there's nothing about it. There was nothing going on.
They
about
already
it.
announced it though. Just not at Game Awards.
Right, yeah. Oh, right, I was gonna say, because George and I were talking, he was like, yeah, nothing ever cool happens at Game Awards, and I was just like, that Sephiroth coming to Smash Brothers was kind of hype. It was probably
That was the Game Awards?
that was probably like the hypest fucking thing at any Game Awards was Sephiroth coming into Smash Bros.
Probably.
I told you about that fucking
crazy.
Peter Griffin thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I watched that little trailer where he doesn't talk.
No, the fucking during the thing, Geoff's just like,
Geoff.
by the way, you guys got to get on Fortnite to get that extra XP boost. We want to make sure you guys earn those Peter Griffin skins, and he's like holding in a laugh because like, but yeah. Anyway, we're back doing this.
No, I forgot we were live. Honestly.
I mean, it's been a while.
I'm just eating chicken parm over here.
Damn, I miss real Italian. Like I'm being fucking poutine.
Yeah, real Italian.
Like a real Canadian over here. All right, 3, 2, 1.
Economic, but a cultural divide between the players in the southern regions and the players in the rest of New Eden. But in the in-between spaces, an entirely new sort of
that
dynamic
loud for
was
you?
evolving,
Loud enough
one
for you?
forgotten by most.
Yeah.
Over the years, the
Similar.
dynamics of the game had shifted
What's up?
radically.
You still hear me? You hear me all right?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, cool. I'm good.
As players gained more and more capital, and as the merchant races were supplanted by a full player economy, piracy was no longer making nearly as much money, and often players would lose more money than they gained by hunting other players.
Oh man.
Many, such as the aforementioned
Oh, man.
mercenaries, abandoned the practice in favor of fulfilling contracts for clients. What's more, the nullsec alliances were growing into empires, and these empires often patrolled and defended their territory, stamping out any piracy not perpetrated by their own members.
Pirates realized they
The
couldn't
only
just
space
start. They couldn't
left
just
for
steal.
these
They had to be
players
paid to
was low
steal.
security space.
Yeah, it sounds like they
or
started their own,
LoSec,
like,
but when they moved,
whatever
their
it's called, their
paradigm
own, like,
gradually
Citadel
began to shift.
base,
Also,
whatever
wait,
it's called.
did you see
Oh.
that? This was
No.
April 14th, 2007. This footage right here.
Crazy.
Dude, I wasn't even beating my shit at that time. Like, that's crazy.
Yo, I think I was.
It took me like another 2 years before I figured out how to
Wait,
do
how
it.
old were we? How old were we?
12.
Oh yeah, I was beating my shit.
It took me another 2 years to start beating my shit, but yeah, no, that's crazy. 2007, dude. Dude, I had a hairy fucking ass, dude. Actually, no, I didn't even have a hairy ass.
Yo, I got that right now.
That's fucking crazy.
But when they
Yo, TMI
moved,
to the
their
internet.
paradigm gradually began to shift. Now
Source
that piracy
unknown.
was no longer making the players much money, the
Where
only
did we get
ones
it?
who continued the practice did so for the love of it. In an interview for Down the Rabbit Hole, a prominent player and leader
Love that he
named
does that.
Phantomite spoke to the role that those
In an interview with
LoSec adopted.
me.
Yeah,
Quote,
yeah.
I feel like me killing people in LoSec isn't piracy, I think it's just PvP. It's not a profession, I don't really earn any money from it. The fact that the game calls what you're doing illegal means that there's some kind of weird dishonor involved that's different to catching a traveler in nullsec. It's just PvP. End
That's
quote.
true. Wait, what?
Those
That's
players
true,
who
that's
decided
weird.
to stay were the only ones
Yeah, they're
dedicated
making
enough to
PvP, like,
Oh, because LoSec is Empire space, and doing crime there gets you in trouble. You have to go to nullsec to. But like, that's also weird because people were already like starting like empires in nullsec. Like nullsec had like more people in it than fucking the Empire space at this point. So like,
I think it was more profitable to be in nullsec. Yeah.
yeah, because there was more people. So like the fact that there, that is true. Like the fact that there's like more crime, but that's also a game thing. Like that's not like the devs saying you can't do this. The devs are saying you can, but you know, like there's more. I don't mind that
to
actually.
continue their piracy, in part due to a particular feature. Early after the release of the game, CCP launched a feature called kill mails, which were permanent in-game records of ship destruction, issued to both the destroyed party and those involved in destroying them, and many players began to covet these kill mails and collect them like trading cards, with certain ships or players being more or less prestigious.
Interesting.
While this wasn't
Like
always the
trophies.
primary motivating factor for those hunting other players, it did mean that they could keep a record of their experiences doing
Are
so,
those big ships called?
ensuring an official method of
Titans.
Titans, yeah. The ones before were like the mothership and the dreadnought.
Right. The
But
mothership.
then-
Yeah.
Those were released in 2005, but then 2004, and then the next year they released the Titan, which is just like those two, but like even bigger. One person was able to afford it, and,
Yeah, and it can teleport. It can teleport,
it can tell up. Yeah, it just needs to be like,
and it can shoot like through a teleporter.
yeah,
I think.
yeah. In this
Which is
game,
nuts. I
you-
really want to see what that
you
looks
don't
like.
you don't need to be right in front of a teleporter. Your ships just need to be like in like proximity of it. But like the Titan, I think was able to teleport like closer or like farther away, and it was able to like launch its like supernova attack like through the teleporter without actually even being there. Like crazy. But
Yeah, crazy.
someone that was a dev worker that they hired that was a player first and then became a dev was giving the band of brothers whereabouts of where that Titan was, and then they all just ambushed him and killed him. So,
You
so
think
that,
it was? Wait, you said he was a fan that became a dev.
they
and,
hired
like,
him because they needed.
playing with Band of Brothers.
Yeah, no, that I mean it's all that's basic. It was basically confirmed, I think, and that's why the Band of Brothers is hated because there was like one guy that actually became a dev. So, that I mean, yeah, that is kind of crazy.
of tracking prestige. But the kill mails introduced another dynamic, loss aversion. Since kill mails were public, one's victories and losses were both available to any who wanted to see them, and a loss was often considered a shame in the eyes of the community, at least to the player who lost the ship. On this, Phantomite said, quote,
Dramatic.
I feel it is socially unacceptable to lose in this game. If you lose a fleet fight to begin with, in local, the winning side will almost always jeer at you and be a bad winner, mock you for having dared to lose a fight in EVE Online. It's not congratulations on winning, it's you idiots, you lost. How stupid do you feel right
This
now?
sounds like a game that Joe
Especially
would
as
have liked.
group sizes get larger, there's a lot of bitterness on both sides. End quote. On the opposite end of the spectrum, a group of players have been growing in size, prominence, and role in the greater
It's literally a
EVE
troll man's
community.
game.
Early in the game's lifetime, a help chat was implemented so that players could offer assistance to other players learning the game, but many found that this limited forum was insufficient due to the complexity of EVE. And so, a new player-run institution was formed, EVE University. Its primary impetus was to assist new players by teaching them the basic mechanics as well as good practices.
Because this
with
game is super
hands-on
complicated, honestly,
experience.
that's kind of
While
necessary.
other corporations would sometimes invite new players and assist them so that they could swell their ranks and achieve greater goals, EVE University had few such aspirations. Rather, uniquely, it declared itself a neutral body who would not take sides in any wars, though its members, known as students or unistas, were free to do as they pleased whenever they chose to leave. Many years later, in an interview with the online EVE news site Crossing Zebras, a new CEO, Asmodeus Valar, said that, quote, EVE University exists to give new players a place to learn about EVE in a supportive community. We maintain neutrality so that our students can move on to whatever section of EVE interests them. End quote. But this neutrality would quickly come to be a limiting factor. In October of 2005, EVE University founded a new alliance called the Big Blue and sought to hold territory in Nullsec. But after less than a year, an unknown client hired Mercenary Coalition to evict them for unclear reasons.
Of course,
Another
just because
reflection of
they
the growing
wanted to.
necessity for corporations to ally themselves with one
That's a
another
big armada.
in order to survive the growing turbulence of Nullsec. EVE University's policy of neutrality wouldn't allow them the partnerships with the larger groups that they required. Unwilling to compromise on this defining feature, EVE University decided to base themselves in high-security space instead, and partnered with other corporations in a new alliance which they named Ivy League, in part to protect themselves from the vast number of war declarations that they were suffering. As a group comprised primarily of new players learning from a smaller number of more seasoned players, declaring war on EVE University was an easy way for more aggressive and less discerning players to gather easy kill mails. Despite these hazards, EVE University began to grow as a foundational part of New Eden's social landscape, with corporations seeking out those who had spent time learning in it. Their decision to retire from Nullsec would become a practically permanent one on June 19, 2009, when CCP released their expansion, Revelations 2. With this expansion, powerful
Revelations 2.
defensive sovereignty bonuses would be granted to anyone who owned over half of the structures within a system for 28 days. Once this had been achieved, a structure called a Sinojammer could be built in the system, disallowing any player from lighting a cynosural field within the system. While capital ships could use stargates, they were choke points in which they could easily be caught, and the only practical way of bringing a capital ship into a fight was through the use of cynosural fields. By restricting their use, it meant that any alliance attacking a system with a high enough sovereignty bonus could only do so with subcapital ships, an effectively impossible task against any active alliance. This meant that Nullsec alliances were now much more stable in their ownership of territory, as long as they possessed enough capital ships. The major factions in Nullsec had now been set. With the base mechanics, the social groups, and the varying playstyles within EVE all growing more complicated and nuanced by the day, the development team recognized that they wouldn't be able to keep track of all of them and balance them alone. And so, in late 2007, Crowd Control Productions announced the establishment of the Council of Stellar Management, a body of players
What?
elected by the player base
Stellar-
to
oh, Stellar meaning
communicate their
stars.
interests directly to the company.
Council
Early
of
in the game's
Amazing
lifetime,
Management.
He thought stellar, bruh.
A council of incredible management, we promise.
By the way, in recent threads, people are saying that they just play Eve with like 2 or 3 friends. So like there are like solo groups, but like at some point you lose out on a lot for not being in like a big alliance or something.
What would you do?
CCP had
I don't
requested
know.
that players join the
Stick around.
developers to speak about the game, but they had been hand-picked after applying, as opposed to the more democratic method of the council. Of the 97 applications, 33 were rejected for varying reasons, including behavioral and technical, leaving 64 to be voted on.
They're calling for players to be like part of like a council of like people that make the rules, basically.
Oh?
Did I hear that right?
Themselves from the vast number of war declarations that they were suffering. As a group comprised primarily of new players learning from a smaller number of more seasoned players, declaring war on Eve University was an easy way for more aggressive and less discerning players to gather easy kill mails. Despite these hazards, Eve University began to grow as a foundational part of New Eden's social landscape, with corporations seeking out those who had spent time learning in it. Their decision to retire from nullsec would become a practically permanent one on June 19, 2009, when CCP released their expansion, Revelations 2. With this
We saw this
expansion,
already, hold on.
powerful defensive
We did?
alliance subcapital, this territory nulls and on track of 7. Crowd Control Productions announced the establishment of the Council of Stellar Management, a body of players elected by the
2008,
player
Jesus.
base to communicate their interests directly to the company. Early in the game's
Oh,
lifetime,
interesting.
CCP
So,
had requested
okay.
that players join the developers to speak about the game, but they had been hand-picked after
It's like
applying,
a representatives
opposed to
kind of
the
thing.
more democratic method of the council. Of the 97 applications, 33 were rejected for varying reasons, including behavioral and technical, leaving 64 to be voted on by the community in a first-past-the-post system, where the 14 players with
That's
the
crazy.
most
The
votes
devs
would
are
be
very
elected.
engaged
A
with
PDF
their
document written
player
by
base. They have to
CCP
be.
Representative
in this
Petter
case.
Seems like
Johannes
it.
Oscarsson details the role and responsibilities of the Council of Stellar Management, but not before spending over half of the document on what he called a comparative analysis of real structural social evolution with the virtual society of EVE Online. In the opening paragraphs, he wrote, quote, "The only consensus in the study of socio-cultural evolution is that no single theory can aptly describe the universal development and progression of any society. Myriad factors ranging from geographical location to
fuck are
religious
you
beliefs
talking
and even
about?
weather conditions, prevailing or roguish, all complicated the analysis. Introducing the most
talking about
subtle variable could drastically
sociocultural
alter the
evolution
course
with
of
EVE
two
Online.
societies that would have otherwise evolved along
This
similar
definitely got made
paths.
fun of.
Thus, it is these general paths, or unilinear milestones, that this paper will draw real-world comparisons from. The purpose
Okay.
of the analogy is to establish the foundation for implementing a deliberative, democratically elected council in EVE. This is by no means an endorsement of any social evolution theory. A comparison with actual civilizations is beyond the scope of this analysis. But it will demonstrate the striking similarities between this theory of real-life societal development and the virtual society evolution of EVE, while also relying on one key assumption about individuals in both
Can we go back
realms,
to talking about
that they are
spaceship?
motivated by the pursuit of value, the core of which is driven by their
This is the
instinct for
thing that they
survival.
had to read to
End
become
quote.
representatives
While
of the
this
community to
document
ask
was
the
likely
developers
meant
what
to
they
help
wanted.
instill within the EVE community the impression
J-
that
just in case you
CCP
forgot.
was taking seriously
They made
their
it real
responsibilities toward the game, it also illustrated the divide that
No,
was
what do
growing
you
between
want?
the players
Within
and
these
their
restrictions,
game
what
world's
do you
caretakers,
want?
despite their attempts to the contrary. While the majority of the
15
player base was
characters.
primarily interested in simply having fun by playing the game on the most minute level, the developers saw themselves as being on the cusp of a newly developing world that reflected elements of the human condition, similar to the way that the founding members of CCP had attempted to create a new internet interface with the virtual reality.
We're onto something even bigger here, guys.
At Oz Virtual.
With these
Oscarson wrote in
fucking
the
polygon
document that,
aliens.
quote,
Hold on, I gotta check something. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Right, you. Shit. Hello. My cat fucking, or one of the cats, like, twisted the webcam.
Nice.
Alright. So they're like, guys, vote on what you want, but also keep in mind that we're onto something. We're onto something crazy here with society.
Until now, comparisons of political philosophy and social structures in the virtual world have been drawn from parallels with the real one. But it cannot be
I love how they were like, oh, we're not trying to make
today,
comparisons,
with
and then
this
goes
many
on to make
people
comparisons.
comprising the civilization of Eve and the potential ripple effect of any change in the way this society is governed, further legislative applications based mostly on CCP's interpretation of the real world are likely to cause more harm than good. To achieve continued success, Eve's society must be granted a larger role in exerting influence on the legislative powers of CCP. Governance of virtual worlds is a unique endeavor. There is no precedence to follow. End quote. The responsibilities for the Council of Stellar Management were more than might typically be expected from a group of player consultants, which perhaps helps to explain the small number of applicants. Quote, at least twice a year, CCP will convene multi-day summit meetings in Reykjavik. In addition, each year CCP holds its FanFest convention. 7 members of the CSM attend these events in person. Council terms will last 12 months, and elections will follow the expiration of each term. This timeframe corresponds roughly to the expansion release cycles of EVE Online. End quote. These council members would be privy to restricted knowledge so that they could give their unique perspectives as players. What sort of effect they would have on the game, however, was yet to be seen. The importance of such communication with the player community was exemplified by the proliferation of player-made tools that were seeing widening popularity. On July 22nd, 2008, a player going by the name Wolari created a post on the official EVE forums in which he announced the release of a map of EVE Online named Dotland. Quote, in the last weeks, I created a system to arrange and generate region maps for EVE. After some hard work on the back end and positioning the systems, I can finally announce a new type of EVE regions maps. The maps are focused to be clean and easy readable, with the most important informations for fleet roaming and planning. They contain daily sovereignty and outpost informations for your favorite 0.0 space. Also, occupancy informations for the new factional warfare are included. End quote. What's more, this
fuck is he
tool would be
saying?
offered for free to any EVE player who wanted to use it, hosted on its own website. Importantly, this map wasn't updated manually. Rather, it pulled information from EVE Online's backend servers in order to update it, meaning that they would update in real time, and Dotland's maps would quickly become the standard. And when players wanted to share maps of EVE Online with one another, rather than using the in-game
Interesting.
map, the clean, clear maps on Dotland would almost always be used. This was far from the only tool developed by players to help others play the game. In 2006, a group of resourceful
big world,
coders
so-
had released a tool which they named
Yeah, it's sad that they
EVEMOD,
have to use,
which
like, an
acted as a
outside
way
app
to
to
manage a
share the
character
locations.
and
Yeah.
plan their ever-important
So,
skills.
like, you know,
which
most games have a
restricted what
map.
a character could do and what sort of innate bonuses
But the
they
fact that
wielded.
they
Like Dotland,
the fact that they basically mapped out like a little mini universe is crazy. But
Mon pulled information from the back-end
that guy.
servers of EVE Online, allowing
Got so
players
much
to
memory.
see aspects of their characters such as their skills, their stats, their total skill points accrued,
fuck
and
is
their
clone
ISK
limit?
balance, all without having to open the game. These sorts of tools
wait,
help
let me.
servers wielded, did what a character could do, and what sort of innate bonuses they wielded. Like Dotland, EveMon pulled information from the back-end servers of EVE Online, allowing players to see aspects of their characters such as their skills, their stats, their total skill points
Charisma,
accrued,
perception.
and
Interesting.
their ISK balance.
It is an RPG
all
through and
without
through, but it's
having
like the
to
most
open the
complicated
game.
RPG I've ever
These
seen.
sorts of tools helped
Yeah.
further erode the feeling of separation between the game and real life, since the game world could be reflected in places other than the game window. Rather than fight these tools, CCP supported their use and would sometimes even showcase them on their website. It was
That's cool.
around this time as well that the listless and much
wouldn't they just
poorer
try and
pirates
improve
in
their
low
own
security
maps?
space would be given a new purpose. On June 10th, 2008, CCP released the expansion Empyrean Age. Among the other changes, the one that attracted the most attention was the introduction of a new opportunity for players called Factional Warfare. After signing up to fight for one of the 4 in-game
Factional.
non-player empires that ruled over high-security empire space, they would be given objectives in low-security space to capture in the name of the empire that they had chosen. But importantly, they would not only be fighting against NPCs, they would also engage other players who had sworn allegiance to a different enemy faction. In this way, players in Empire space could fight with other players in a structured yet accessible fashion. While factional warfare itself held little interest for the pirate corporations in LowSec, it meant that far more players would be ushered into their domain. As the less experienced players from HighSec wandered into LowSec in order to complete their objectives, roving bands of low-sec pirates would catch individuals and small fleets unaware, swooping in to rapidly dispatch those looking to engage in factional warfare. These pirates had become a part of the landscape of low-sec, maintaining a level of unavoidable danger to the game, and the introduction of factional warfare had reinvigorated them. Evading pirates was a skill in which traders and industrialists prided themselves, and it was common to hear such peaceful players breathlessly recount their experiences avoiding and outwitting them. But soon, the game would see an addition that would further complicate it, crossing the border between the real world and the virtual world of New Eden in a way that would eventually make its dealings the subject of international attention and awe.
The fact that it wasn't like there weren't like crazy amount of like NPC or like enemy NPCs you could fight or like missions in the beginning, and that like the alliances and all that shit was all players. Like, are empires
In
NPCs?
November of 2000,
Are empires NPCs? Like that's
No,
like
I think the Empire was like established in Eve Online at some point, maybe at the maybe at the beginning of the game, and like there's Empire Space, right? High sec, like right in the
right,
middle of
right,
the
and you
map.
could and okay, so like
But I think those, but that I think
that's
that
game shit.
existed though.
That's
But
like game
now,
shit.
yeah, but then
Alliances and corporate
CCP like added that DLC where they made um
like
the Empire's waging war against nullsec, so it gives players a reason to
yeah.
fight each other.
Yeah, it gives them a reason because like the reasons that people were already fighting were among the players
Like
themselves.
piracy. It was
Yeah.
like piracy.
What's up, Krillany? But yeah,
Yo.
it's crazy that like like all the conflicts early on were all player caused.
Mm-hmm.
2008, CCP announced the release of a new form of currency.
Yeah, it's kind of
As
crazy.
was
This game's
common
been out for a
practice,
long
players
ass
could either
time, and then
buy
like
cards
now
at local
PvP is the
stores
thing.
or have cards mailed to them,
PvE.
which they could redeem to extend
No,
their
structured
membership,
PvP.
allowing
Oh,
them
yeah.
continued access to the game. For EVE, much like other
Wait,
games of its
another
kind,
wait, a
the
new
monthly
fucking
fee
currency?
was
That's huge. The Chinese,
In November of
CCP, the Chinese
2008,
Communist Party, no,
CCP
the
announced the
crowd
release
control.
of a new form of currency. As was
they made
common
EVE.
practice, players
Yeah,
could either
developers.
buy cards at local stores or have cards mailed to them, which they could
Oh,
redeem to
microtransactions?
extend their
Here we go.
membership, allowing them continued access to the game. For EVE, much like other games of its kind, the monthly fee was $15, with discounts when bought in larger increments. However, CCP was now offering a new function for these cards. When a player bought one, they would now have the option to either redeem it normally and use it to lengthen their subscription, or they could instead exchange their card for a new in-game item called a Pilot's License Extension, or Plex, at an exchange rate of 1 Plex per month of game time. If they chose
Okay.
the latter option, an in-game item would appear in the hangar of the station in which one of their characters was docked. This Plex could then later be expended for the subscription if the player so chose. For the player who used the Plex in this way, it simply added an extra step to the process of renewing a subscription. But there was one major, important difference. Since the Plex was an in-game item,
Oh,
it could
no.
be bought and sold on the player market.
Oh,
and
no.
whoever bought the Plex could redeem it for their own character, meaning that a
That's
player with enough in-game
weird.
money could effectively pay for their subscription by buying Plex from other players.
That's
with
really
in-game
weird.
money.
Maybe
The
I think
most
this is where
obvious
the
effect
in-game
was
cur-
that it
like the
gave
real
many
world money thing
players a goal.
starts.
Make enough in-game money to pay for their own subscription month to month by buying Plex.
It's like
from
soft
other
humanity.
players, effectively playing for free. But for those on the outside looking in, it gave something much more
That's
important.
crazy. So if you're good at the game, you play
subscription
for free.
cards for
Yep.
EVE
After you
Online
buy
could
initially.
typically be
That's
bought
crazy.
for $35 and offered 2 months of subscription, which meant that they could be redeemed for 2 Plex. This gave Plex a stable real-world value of approximately $17, since Plex would
That's
be bought and sold.
so they didn't make a currency per se. They just gave like an exchange currency to be used. Like Plex is basically
For your
real.
membership to
Yeah.
extend your membership.
Yeah, but Plex is basically real money.
Yeah.
In-game for
But
IS,
wasn't
the
intentional, I
in-game
don't think.
currency, and the
No,
real-world
it sounds like it
value
was.
of
How
one
else-
Plex was
how else would it be?
relatively consistent.
Well,
This
they didn't intend for it to be traded like currency. That's what
Well, why would they make it an item then?
I don't know. That's so weird. Also,
If you can exchange items
fun fact
and
to
sell them,
to form an alliance in the game, it costs 1 billion ISK.
form an alliance like what in nullsec?
Yeah, like alliances and corporations.
Oh, to just like make a clan.
An alliance is a group of corporations. Okay, an alliance could have several different corporations in it. Forming a corporation. Whatever.
This meant that there was a way to track the real-world value of the in-game currency without having to refer
Anyone
to
could
the
start as a
black market
corporation,
price,
okay.
which was subject to
I
fluctuation.
sorry. I thought corporations and alliances were like shit that people were starting outside of the game, like in like message boards and shit. I didn't realize that that was like a
Yeah, an
thing.
in-game thing. No, it looked like one of the stats was like business or so, like one of the in-game stats. You know, it's
Right,
like it
yeah.
was industry. It was industry. That's what it
Yeah,
was.
these people are like doing businesses in a game. They could be fucking doing businesses in real life.
and which many sources were reluctant to
Make
acknowledge
some money,
or
loser.
reference because of its inherently
black
opaque
market, here we
nature.
go.
What's more, because of the stability of the price of Plex in the real world, the gradual inflation of the value of ISK could be tracked as well. Such aspects only enhance the interest of mainstream publications, including Forbes, a popular and well-regarded business magazine which had already been paying attention to EVE Online due in part to the business-themed naming scheme of its player structures. An article from 2008 by Matthew Kirdahy, named From MMO to CEO, reads in part, quote, Sean Conover has 2 jobs. One is at a computer forensics lab in suburban New Jersey. The other is in a fantastical galaxy inhabited by 25,000 intelligent life forms driven by power and greed. In one place, he takes orders. In the other, he gives them. There are many more like Conover, and with good reason. It's in this virtual space where tomorrow's business leaders are being born. Mom may mock video games no more. End quote. The EVE player interviewed for this article was the notable figure Darius Johnson, the leader of
What
Goonfleet
is
and the
that?
greater Goonswarm Alliance.
Goon
For the
Swarm.
last year and a half, Goonswarm and their allies, the Russians hailing from the northeastern corner of the map, had been
Jesus.
continuing their war against Band of Brothers, and during
And
that time,
capitalism.
they had become known for their effective, if obnoxious, propaganda. Beyond the posters, which were often photoshopped versions of World War II propaganda posters, the Mittani had taken to regularly posting on his blog about the war, both to rally the goons and guide
And he's
the
a- and
public
he's a
perception
CEO.
to bolster morale and
Or
increase
like a
membership.
forensic scientist
And
in real
this
life.
gave mainstream news outlets an easy way to monitor the war, albeit through a heavily biased source. Even knowing this bias, this meant that as publications such as Forbes and The Guardian wrote about EVE Online, it was often through the paradigm and context of the goons. External news outlets also helped to personalize the leaders. Furthering Kirdahy's article, he writes, quote, when Conover gets home from his 9-to-5 job, he logs onto a virtual world as Darius Johnson, chief executive of Goonfleet, a
I love how
corporation
Goonfleet
comprised
was
of more
at
than
one point,
2,800
or Goonfleet is
players
part of
in
Goonswarm.
EVE. The
I
leadership
like
experience has challenged Conover
that
the same way
the
modern
goons were
CEO
considered
is
like
challenged.
pariahs,
He
like
worries
nobody
about
wanted to fuck with them,
economics,
and then
employee morale,
the Band of
production,
Brothers
training,
came.
and even a
Now the Band of
succession
Brothers
plan
is the
for
most
chief
hated.
devising. After all, the next
Goonfleet
guy
came
has
over
to be
from
able to
that
weather
other
the
game,
storm
right?
too.
Something
End
beyond.
quote. In particular, the term
No, they were just,
failure cascade
yeah.
had become common in
No,
new
no, no,
EVE,
no.
popularized
No,
by
I think
the
that's
Mittani
right.
and
No, they
quickly
were just a bunch of
adopted by news
newbies.
outlets who were already heavily
It was the,
reliant on his writing when
Yeah,
discussing
they came over from another
EVE.
game,
In
another
an
space
article
game
from
that, like,
2009,
No, that was
died.
another
the
alliance, and then
Mittani
they
wrote,
also
"In the past 4
they also
years,
formed
I've
Band of
witnessed
Brothers.
more
The
than
goons
20
were just like
alliances
noobs.
disintegrate, and I've had the benefit of directly orchestrating a good number of those. Better than just hammering
I think
at
they
them
came
from
from
the
World of
outside,
Warcraft,
I've been
actually.
able to witness the process from the inside concurrently by way of our spy network. While watching Lotka Volterra explode in much the same way Veritas Immortalis had, I dubbed this death cycle the failure cascade, due to the way in which the process rapidly accelerates from small errors into thermonuclear drama. Delightfully enough, even our most vehement enemies have chosen to use my nomenclature, as well as the more traditional media. Apparently, the term has some pre-existing engineering use, but Googling it now turns up mostly yammering about spaceships. He went on to define the term, quote, a failure cascade is the disintegration of an alliance caused by collective helplessness in the face of sustained and unrationalizable adversity through a process of pilot attribution shifting from the alliance to the corporation or the individual.
Unrationalizable is not a word.
Both Crowd Control Productions and Goonswarm were facing prodigious growth, and both were simultaneously taking great risks in attempts to reap great rewards.
Dude, you have to kill that. You have to destroy that sound effect.
No.
You have to annihilate it.
It had been over 2 years since the death of Steve the Titan, and still the war in Nullsec continued, involving every major power. And after numerous movements of the battle line back and forth, Band of Brothers had been pushed all the way back into their home region of Delve. To their north, the Northern Coalition had recovered from total destruction, retaken territory, and went on the offensive after fighting back the forces of Mercenary Coalition, who had been fighting the war for Band of Brothers, but eventually abandoned them in order to establish themselves in new territory and continue their existence as guns for hire. Meanwhile, from the east, the forces of Goonswarm and their allies, the Red Alliance, continued to strike. Previously, the Russians of the Red Alliance had joined Goonswarm in an effort to defeat Band of Brothers, but after this effort failed, they retreated to their home regions in the southeast to live next door to the Goons. With their forces combined, their territory was nearly impossible for any alliance to assail. Typically, the Russians were cagey, reclusive, and distrustful, but they had joined Goonswarm to defeat their common enemies in Band of Brothers. But now that Band of Brothers had been fought back to Fortress Delve, the war had reached a standstill. Delve's epithet was well earned. It had served as the home region for Band of Brothers for years now, and was nigh unassailable due to the coordination of Band of Brothers' fleets and the system's solid sovereignty bonuses, which practically restricted any enemy fleet from fielding anything larger than a dreadnought in Band of Brothers territory. Multiple Titans had been lost by both sides, but Band of Brothers still had enough capital ships to bounce back any assault on its borders. And if the smaller capital ships weren't enough, then the combined might of 8 simultaneous doomsday blasts from Band
Goonswarm were guys that came from Something Awful. That website.
Oh?
Yeah. I knew they weren't the same. Yeah.
Of Brothers' 8 remaining Titans would be enough to turn any fight. Without the ability
the Band of Brothers
to
have
field
8
their
Titans
own
now,
Titans,
Jesus.
The rest of Nullsec could do little to penetrate into Delve. But in early 2009, this state of affairs suddenly and radically changed. One of the high-ranking members of Band of Brothers, Hargoth Agamar, had tired of the other leaders and joined Goonswarm, offering to help them in whatever way they could. After some rumination, Goonswarm's spy master, the Mittani, devised a plan of action. Andrew Groen chronicled what transpired in Empires
now people
of
trust
Eve.
the Goonswarm.
Quote, on the night of February 4th, 2009, Hargoth Agamar logged into EVE Online and docked his ship at the headquarters of Black Nova Corporation, one of the main member corporations of Band of Brothers. From Band of Brothers, Hargoth stole 15 dreadnoughts and an entire ship hangar containing hundreds of smaller ships. He also stole a huge amount of stronium, starbase and dreadnought fuel.
How did he do that?
With a few clicks, he stole everything his corporation owned. In the empty hangar folders, he left just a single item, a note with one sentence written on it. The Mittani sends his regards. When he was done with his theft, he went to work, ending the entire alliance. He removed the other directors from their positions and closed the alliance. With no alliance on record named Band of Brothers, every one of its sovereignty claims was instantly dropped. Band of Brothers had claimed sovereignty for in every system in Delve, but after Hargoth Agamar struck, there was no longer an alliance called Band of Brothers.
Jesus.
As a
How
result,
does he fucking
all
do
of the
that?
star bases owned by Bob went offline without an
Wait,
alliance.
he was a member of Band of Brothers. He was a high-ranking member of Band of Brothers, and he just
yeah, he
decided to
betrayed
end
them.
it. He stole everything, all their shit, and just
Betrayed
left.
them for, he betrayed them for Mittani? What did he say?
Let me.
Online
How
and
did he
thanking them
fucking
Band of Brothers.
Make
But
them
now
not
that
you
Band
went
of
back
Brothers
way
have been
too far,
fought back
way
to
too far.
Emperors, and if the smaller capital Shlani fought this years and years of Band of Brunley and radically changed. One of the high-ranking members of Band of Brothers, Hargoth Agamar, had tired of the other leaders and joined Goonswarm, offering to help them in whatever way they could.
He betrayed them.
After some rumination,
He did some
Goonswarm's
espionage,
spy
some
master,
corporate
the
espionage.
Mittani, devised a plan of action. Andrew Groen spy map in whatever way they could. After some rumination, Goonswarm's spy master, the Mittani, devised a plan of action. Andrew Groen chronicled what transpired in Empires of Eve. Quote, on the night of February 4th, 2009, Hargoth Agamar logged into EVE Online and docked his ship at the headquarters of Black Nova Corporation, one of the main member corporations of Band of Brothers. From Band of Brothers, Hargoth stole 15 dreadnoughts and an entire ship hangar containing hundreds of smaller ships.
The Mittani
He
is
also stole a huge
is a
amount of
person.
strontium, starbase, and
Someone from
dreadnought
Goon
fuel.
Squad.
He's
With
someone
a
from
few
Goon
clicks,
Squad, yeah.
he stole
He's a
everything
spy
his
master.
corporation
What a
owned.
name.
In the empty hangar folders, he
I
left
think
just
this
a
guy is the
single
spy
item,
master,
a note with
Hargoth.
one sentence written on it. The Mittani sends his regards. When he was done with his theft, he went to work, ending the entire alliance.
That seems
He
unfair.
removed the other directors from their positions and closed the alliance. With no alliance on record named Band of
Yeah, how does
Brothers,
he just, like,
every one of its
end-
sovereignty
how
claims
does he just
was
end it?
instantly
Mm.
dropped.
They
Band
just
of
left the
Brothers
end-
had
they
claimed
left the
sovereignty
end
for
button
in every system in
around.
Delve, but after
don't
Hargoth
know.
Agamar struck, there was no longer an alliance called Band of Brothers. As a result, all of the star bases owned by Bob went offline without an alliance to control them. Their capital systems were no longer
just a switch?
invulnerable,
Is there a
and they
switch?
had
It's
no
like-
way
yeah, I
to
guess.
stop
So he
enemy
just got
alliances
bored and
from
he's-
Flip it,
bringing
end the
heavy
alliance.
artillery
This seems
right
really
into
unfair.
the heart of Band of Brothers' empire. End quote. The rest of New Eden now had a 28-day window to capture enough territory to prevent Band of Brothers from regaining their sovereignty, but only Goonswarm was in a
damn.
position to capitalize on this, and simply destroying Band of Brothers was no longer enough for them. The leader of Goonswarm, Darius Johnson, ordered that all assets in Alliance territory be brought to the front lines in preparation for a fight in Delve, where they would either drive out Band of Brothers and claim Delve as their new home, or be left destitute. This would also help to fend off
Oh, they
enemies,
left their
at
home,
least for
like,
a time.
they have
During
no,
the
they
war,
left
The
it.
general unpleasantness of both the Russian alliances and Goonswarm had resulted in enough feuds that they had broken their treaties with one another, and a significant contingent of Russians had joined forces with Band of Brothers, sandwiching the goons between the two. There were also rumors and accounts of real money being paid to players to alter the political landscape, but the complete abandonment of territory by Goonswarm guaranteed that the Russians would be preoccupied with claiming all of the territory that had once belonged to the Goons, as they threw themselves recklessly at Band of
All this
Brothers,
treachery.
at least for the first few weeks. No other alliance seems to have been warned of this opportunity, and it would take time to mobilize. Now, Goonswarm would launch a blitzkrieg the likes of which had never been seen in EVE Online. But as Goonswarm was beginning its invasion, the game would see a radical change, and the denizens of this particular edition would soon exist outside of the paradigm and culture of any other part of New Eden. On March 10th, 2009, CCP announced the release of the Apocrypha expansion. Among other changes, including a higher tier of specialized ships, this update introduced wormholes. These anomalies, functionally, were short-lived entrances into an entirely new cluster of star systems, but the wormholes
Interesting.
would only survive for a maximum of a few days before collapsing permanently, and new ones would spawn unpredictably both
That-
in New Eden
huh.
and in this new
weird.
region. These systems boasted no stargates. Rather, they were connected to one another and the normal stars in New Eden exclusively with a network of
Can you destroy
wormholes. And the
stargates?
transient and unpredictable nature of these wormholes
I remember they had
created
guns
an
on them. They
ever-shifting
like defended
labyrinth.
themselves.
Despite the vast new territory now made available,
So
players were
these aren't.
tentative
So
to
you could
venture
travel,
into it
fast
for
travel without
several reasons.
stargates, but it's
First,
random,
finding
basically.
the wormholes was a task
Yeah,
unto
and
itself.
they link
In
to
order
worlds that
discover
are
a
only
wormhole,
connected to
a
that
player had to make use
warp
of the
hole,
new
so
scanning tools.
they're like-
which
Yeah, but it's
required
also
new
random where they
skills
end up,
that
so-
took time
they're
for
only
characters
accessible
to
for a little
learn.
bit?
The systems themselves, however, were remarkably dangerous. Much like Nullsec, Concord offered no protection in wormhole space, and so
Wormhole
anyone
space.
traveling through a wormhole could easily be attacked upon arrival by other players looking for a fight. Even then, however, the points of interest found through a wormhole were often remarkably dangerous. Fighting and looting NPCs would require a well-equipped squad of players, and the anomaly sites placed for explorers often were similarly defended. What's more, if a player lacked the requisite knowledge, and was unlucky, it was possible for a wormhole to collapse behind them after entering it, leaving them stranded in unknown and hostile territory, and the only method of escape was to wander aimlessly until discovering a wormhole that would take them back to New Eden,
That
though
sounds like
likely
cancer.
far from where they had entered. Most had little
Wait,
interest
what'd he
in
say?
investigating beyond peeking out of
like
curiosity.
the warp hole could
But there were
close
others
behind
who saw
them, and you could be
potential in
trapped
this
in
new, unexplored
this
region.
space.
Though the danger in
It should
wormhole
take you like
space
hours
was
to get back
higher,
out.
the materials there were
Christ.
commensurately valuable,
Just gotta
as the
wander
gases
around.
required to
Oh,
make
wormhole
the
space
new
is like a
highest
completely
tier
new
ships
area.
could only be
Yeah,
found there.
okay.
And so, mining gas clouds
I thought it
became
just
an
I thought it
important,
teleported
if
you to
small
other parts
part
in
of
New
the
Eden.
EVE economy. Paradoxically,
Nah, it
due
looked
in
like it was
part
new
to the
space.
random nature
Okay.
of wormholes, gas became a reliable resource, as it was difficult
Gas.
for aggressive players to attack others harvesting gas. Much like wormholes, gas clouds would spawn randomly and had to be scanned down with probes before their location was revealed, meaning that a reasonably attentive gas miner could spot the probes with a directional scan and escape long before any danger manifested. Beyond these more systemic limitations, there was another hard limitation that restricted the use of overwhelming force in wormhole space. The wormholes themselves could only accommodate ships below a certain size, and after a certain amount of mass passed through a wormhole, it would collapse, meaning that the massive fleets and large ships wielded by the Nullsec powers were practically useless in this new, chaotic region. The ease and safety with which gas could be harvested, and the difficulty that established corporations would have utilizing their vast wealth and resources, meant that this territory was far more accessible to less wealthy players and corporations, in contrast to Nullsec, which was now crowded with belligerent and exclusive factions. Most large corporations were also still embroiled in the ongoing war against Band of Brothers and had few resources left to engage with wormholes. Given this and the wide breadth of territory now available, smaller groups of players began
Someone's
to
gonna
move
take
into
over new
these
space.
wormholes and establish presences
Wormhole
there,
space.
deploying starbases
Sounds like it's hard
and
to get to,
storing
though.
fleets of ships. Those who chose to live in this territory were given a simple moniker: wormholers. The interests of these early wormholers varied widely, but all of them were inspired by a sense of adventure and the excitement of uncertainty. Many took the time to explore this new space and study the rules by which it functioned, and over time, the players were able to divine certain patterns. For example, many wormhole systems had what they called a static hole, which would always link to the same kind of system. A static high-sec hole, for instance, meant that there was always a wormhole leading to high-security space in the system, and if the one leading to high-sec collapsed, then another would take its place, leading to another high-security system. However, such static holes to HiSec were at a premium, and so, sometimes, multiple small corporations would deploy starbases in the same system, but since few had the resources to prosecute any sort of significant conflict, and nobody would benefit from harassing one another, many of them entered into gentlemen's agreements to not attack one another unless agreeing to fight for sport. These agreements were the first manifestation of the code of honor by which wormholers would play, known earnestly, derisively, and sarcastically as Wormhole Bushido, named for the code by which Japanese samurai warriors would live. But while players were exploring the new aspects of EVE Online, Crowd Control Productions was working on an entirely new game. In August of 2009, CCP Games announced their next project set in the EVE universe, a first-person shooter named Dust 514. Speculation about the gameplay was overshadowed by the fact that Dust 514 would do more than share a setting with EVE Online. Events in Dust 514 would directly impact those playing the MMO, and those playing the MMO
That's
could
insane.
affect battles in Dust.
How?
The gaming news publication
CCP
GameSpot
is
quoted
they're
Hilmar
insane.
Pedersen as saying,
Sounds
the
like it.
primary
Some of their
gameplay
just,
features
game
brutal
design
ground combat
is a
that
little
takes
weird.
place on the surface of planets. Dust 514 is the infantry, and an EVE Online player can contract a Dust team to go in and take control of a planet.
Oh my
The
god.
fleet does the flying, the infantry does
I forgot
the
that
dying.
planets were a thing you could take
End
over.
quote. Guy Cocker, writing for GameSpot, went on to say that, quote, the game has been under development for 3 years at CCP Shanghai, with input from other CCP studios worldwide. We questioned Pedersen about the platform.
It sounds like that would
the
be
game
much
is
cooler
being
as a
developed
DLC,
for,
though.
as well as subscription
Yeah.
details.
It's
but he
interesting though.
declined
You
to
could hire
comment
guys
at this
playing one
time.
game to
But it was
attack a
confirmed
planet
that
that
the
affects
game
your
was
game.
being developed for current generation
Why not just make that a
hardware.
part of EVE?
Yeah,
End
I don't
quote.
know.
After revealing some gameplay at the annual FanFest in October of
Oh,
that
let me guess, it
year,
never got released.
Hilmar Pedersen proudly spoke with IGN further about the game. Quote, Dust 514 is first and foremost a first-class FPS mixed with real-time strategy elements and persistent world components, which are innovative in their own right. Still, the biggest innovation in Dust 514 is that the outcome of battles directly affects the resource and power controls in EVE Online. This will significantly enhance the gaming experience that our current 300,000 subscribers enjoy by adding a whole new level of gameplay
It's not a whole lot.
that they can affect. At
And
its
you also gotta
core,
buy
Dust
this also. You gotta
514
buy
is a
this.
first-person
Yeah.
shooter with run-and-gun gameplay. But there is a heavy emphasis on vehicular combat that layers tactical and strategic
There was only
dimensions
300,000
within each
subscribers at
battle.
the time. That's
In
crazy.
addition, weapons and modules
It's not a
are
whole lot.
upgradable in real
No,
time,
not really.
which we believe pushes Dust 514
maybe that's why we didn't
beyond
know
what
what
has
EVE
been
was
seen
until
in the
recently.
market so far. End quote. Notable
that's
features were
subscriptions,
map
right? So one person
sizes
can have, like, a
measuring
couple
5
subscriptions.
kilometers squared,
true.
and, perhaps most importantly, the ability for Dust mercenaries to take control over certain regions of planets for corporations in EVE Online, or for Dust corporations to take those sections of planets for themselves. Early gameplay footage shown at FanFest was promising and elicited excited reactions from the crowd despite its limited scope. But as players were anticipating the new battles to be had in Dust 514, the years-long war in Nullsec was finally reaching its conclusion, and the aftermath would permanently alter the social landscape of New Eden.
Yo, I really love Fred, but I think we might have to like bump this up to 1.25 speed.
After such an extended period of direct
If you want.
You would be open to that? Oh, I want this. I want the shitty subtitles. They're funny. Give me the shitty subtitles. Yeah, baby. Yeah.
Oh, the guys that formed not Band of Brothers, but this like alliance coalition. Those are the guys that came from Earth and Beyond when that game shut down in 2004.
Yeah.
They came to EVE Online.
Oh wait, who? Who? Oh, it was a different alliance.
It was a different alliance, and then shortly after, Band of Brothers was started, unrelated. But the Goon Swarm came from something awful. They were basically trolls. I'm looking up if there was ever been like Eve players in real life, like finding out that they're Eve players from another corporation or alliance, and then they get into a fist fight because they
Knuckling,
lost like millions of
knuckling up.
dollars or something.
Fucking knuckle up, goon swarm scum.
Conflict, the alliances in Nullsec had grown skilled at husbanding their resources and managing their fleets,
That's
the latter of which
1.25.
had grown into affairs often involving hundreds of people on both
How do you
sides.
feel?
This new method of
Sounds
waging
normal.
warfare placed greater importance on management rather than moment-to-moment battles. But managing such a vast number of players was a difficult
He talks so
task.
slow. Jesus.
Unlike an army of
know.
professional soldiers or paid employees, the people who comprised the fleets
Nah,
in EVE
definitely go
Online
to
were
Dungeon
playing in their spare
1.5.
time, and the most effective way to form a fleet was for the fleet commander
there you
to
go.
put out a call to their alliance, asking for people to join for a potential fight. The number of people who joined was never certain. The attendance of individuals could change due to real-life factors, interest in the upcoming battle, or simply due to the waxing and waning of engagement with the game, making morale a key factor to the cohesion of alliances. If morale dropped low enough, then people would simply not answer calls for fleets or even leave
Like
their
real-life
corporations
morale.
entirely. If a corporation leader lost faith in their alliance, then they could take their entire corporation with them when they left. Despite the overwhelming importance of morale, the
I love how
most effective ways to
Band of
wage
Brothers
war in
had
EVE
a
Online
had a
were often
dev
far from entertaining
help
for the
them.
individual. It was
And then
common for
Goon
a fleet
Swarm
commander
played
to
fucking
call for a
dirty.
fleet, form up in position, move from location to location, or even
Yeah, I
keep
kinda
the
dig
fleet
that.
stationary
It made
for
them
hours and then
non-existent
disband
also.
the fleet
Yeah.
due to a lack of need. As fleets grew more expensive and the need for
Although the
strategic
people that
dominance
took
prevailed
the
over the
Titan
desire for action,
that
the
was
impetus
taken
to
down,
engage
Steve,
in
was
equal
not
fights
like a
or
Goon
even
Swarm
slightly
thing.
favorable fights diminished due to loss aversion, and given the responsibilities bestowed upon fleet commanders, there was little incentive to risk the large ships now demanded by war. This loss aversion worked similarly for the individual player as it did for the corporation and alliance. Few people would be willing to risk their most expensive ships in a large fight where they had little say in the outcome. A player who lost a capital ship once may simply have decided that it wasn't worth the risk of joining a fleet. To mitigate this, many corporations enacted measures called Ship Replacement Programs, or SRPs. When a player lost a ship while participating in operations with the corporation, they could submit a claim and be reimbursed for their loss, either in part or in full, paid with the money gathered from passive income, such as moon mining. This passive income was part of the reason why Band of Brothers could fund such an extensive war while fighting on multiple fronts and maintaining morale. But now that Goon Swarm, through subterfuge, had eliminated the sovereignty that insulated Band of Brothers from its enemies, it would soon become nearly impossible to maintain a solid line of defense for its vulnerable economic center. What's more, Goon Swarm had ensured the morale of their members by abandoning their own territory and claiming that of Band of Brothers as their own, drawing from the classic Chinese treatise, The Art of War.
That's really weird. Like, Band of Brothers was still a threat, even though they technically were homeless, and then Goon Swarm took all their shit from their home to go attack Band of Brothers, so now they're basically homeless too. Except, you know, they had
They're moving in. They're moving into the Band of Brothers.
or they're
territory.
trying to, yeah, because I guess
As
it's
translated
profitable.
by Lionel Giles, one
And the
prominent section
Russians
reads,
stole the Goon
quote,
Squad
"Throw your
territory."
soldiers
Yeah.
into positions
Well,
whence
they're
there is
fighting
no
their
escape,
allied
and they will
territory. It's
prefer
weird.
death to flight. If there is no place of refuge, they will stand firm. If they are in hostile country, they will show a stubborn front." End quote. It is with this tenacity that Goon Swarm descended upon the territory of Band of Brothers, striking at all constituent corporations at once,
Two
attempting
asshole
to break their will before the sovereignty bonuses returned,
alliances
and
fighting.
once again made invasion impossible. This would be expedited by a massive mistake made by Band of Brothers. Andrew Browen details the mistake in Empires of Eve. Quote, Band of Brothers ordered every one of its capital ship pilots to log off at an open NPC-controlled station in PRTAC 8CA in Delve. However, Goon Swarm spies found out about the massive stockpile of warships and called in their allies to organize a massive blockade
That's
of the
such
station.
shit
They
that,
were
like,
able
if
to
you're
surround the
AFK, you just get
indestructible NPC
fucked.
station, trapping every last one of Band of Brothers' dreadnoughts and carriers inside. The blockade around Band of Brothers' fleet held for 30 days straight. End quote. By the time the Russians came to assist, it was far too late. Delve now belonged to Goon Swarm, as did its vast natural resources.
Russians
and this
left Goon
readjustment of
Swarm and
power
allied
would
with
come
Band of
to shape
Brothers.
the game in ways that players could scarcely predict. But even as the massive war in Nullsec was finally calming, Crowd Control Productions was planning massive additions and adjustments, one of which coincided with the end of the war in Delve. Up until the end of 2009, the presence of a Titan on the battlefield was overwhelming and oppressive due to the sheer power of its doomsday weapon, capable of destroying nearly any non-capital ship in a 500-kilometer radius, centered on a point of the pilot's choosing. Often, when a Titan arrived, the existence of anything smaller than a dreadnought was invalidated. However, on December 1st, 2009, a significant change was made to the Titan's signature weapon. Rather than a massive area of effect, the Doomsday would now be a focused single-target burst of damage, capable of
But can it
destroying
travel
or
through
severely damaging even the
stargates?
largest ships in a single blast. With this change, the importance of large populations in battle was re-emphasized. A fleet of
Trillinia
smaller
asked, do y'all
subcapital
play Eve?
ships
No,
was
we're just
always
watching the
necessary
new
for
Down the
competing
Rabbit Hole
super
video
capital ships
because
to
we're
perform
curious.
well.
Our friend of
And
ours
now
played
that a
Eve.
subcapital fleet
Want to
couldn't
start
be
an Eve
immediately
group? I
decimated
mean,
upon the arrival of a Titan,
No.
greater populations
if
of
it's
players
free.
could again become a
The game is
stronger
free. I need an
deciding
MMO to get back
factor.
into.
More
I'd get into
importantly,
Eve
for
if I
most
had
other
a group.
players who had only a tangential
Yeah, no,
attachment to nullsec, another promised
maybe for a
feature
couple
was being
streams
touted
just to
by
see how
Cloud
it
Control
is, but
Productions,
Fuck
something that they
no.
had been planning for the
I mean,
past
to
3
start,
years.
it's free. So.
Ambulation, which had been renamed
I don't even
to
care.
Walking in Stations. Over the past year, the company had released various teasers and discussed
Yeah,
their
we're not
goals
big
for
into
the project.
MMOs, unfortunately.
And what it's about
I mean, I
giving the
would.
players the
MMOs
full
are
body
typically,
avatar,
like,
the
really
ability
hard
to
to get
exit their
into.
ships and go into space station and go to bars and corporation offices and socialize and play mini games as an embodied avatar.
However, there was some question as to the necessity of such a feature. The development time and work required were remarkable, but players were already socializing using various out-of-game methods that were far more visible and already established, such as IRC chats and even the official forums. While there was quite a bit of excitement, there was also trepidation that it would be superfluous or add extraneous requirements to what players could already do. As Crowd Control Productions grappled with how to implement walking in stations, other projects were floundering. The Eve collectible card game, which they had produced in conjunction with the recently acquired White Wolf Productions, had suffered a lukewarm reception after limited marketing outside of conventions, despite positive reviews from gaming publications. The single expansion released in 2007 had suffered a laborious
Yeah,
release,
that does look like an early
reprinted 3
2000s
times
card.
before the cards were completed correctly, but shortly after a lackluster launch, it appears that the entire card game was abandoned. The company's other projects were also beginning to struggle. A scathing article from The Guardian in 2014
that game.
retrospectively described Crowd Control Productions as extremely disorganized when managing the staff from White Wolf. Quote, very shortly after initial development began, the company started blurring the lines between the World of Darkness and Eve projects. Repeatedly, staff were shifted over from the former to work on expansion projects for the latter. At times, our sources say, the entire World of Darkness staff was put onto Eve. End quote. The problems within the team itself were numerous. Developers interviewed for the article cited problems in various areas of development, including demands for small changes that required entire rewrites, weak creative vision, poor budgeting, a lack of managerial responsibility, and aggressive, hostile design meetings. Quote, most of the sources spoken to for this piece identified the same problematic CCP manager who had
They
little
keep
vision
trying to
for what
add,
the
like,
finished
Second
game would
Life
look like. Not
kind of
once
shit
did he
to a
answer any
game,
question about moment-to-moment
because that was like
gameplay or
what they
areas of
started
focus,
out
as
as,
one
because they're
source
like,
said.
oh, that was our
Instead, he
passion.
preferred to deliver buzzword-laden rambles. It was not uncommon
Yeah,
for
we
him
gotta
to
get back to our
communicate in
roots.
onomatopoeia. I once saw him looking over the shoulder of a programmer at some bit of user
I mean, having
interface the
like
poor guy had
a
hacked
way to,
together.
like, you know,
He straightened
socialize
up,
in
put
game is
fingers
not
to
a bad
lips and
idea
said,
though.
no, this isn't it at all. Make it more... He hissed on his fingertips like the air coming out of a bicycle tire, and then just walked away. End quote. As the World of Darkness team struggled, work continued on Dust 514, but to properly integrate its
Oh,
game
that's
world
cool.
with that of EVE Online, the infantry would need the planets over which they were to fight, and on May 26, 2010, this prize would be introduced in the Tyrannus expansion. With this, the pilots in EVE Online would be able to lay claim to planets and exploit their resources by establishing infrastructure, with the intention of being able to contest them with Dust 514 mercenary groups. Such resources would only increase the wealth of the existing nullsec factions and their growing industries, now able to flourish with the end of the war against Band of Brothers. But who precisely would fight these battles was still uncertain. Since 2009, Crowd Control Productions had been mum about how people would be able to play the game, only specifying that it would be made for current generation hardware, a term typically reserved for consoles. In June of 2011, the concerns of many players were confirmed. Dust 514 would be exclusive to Sony's PlayStation 3 and portable PlayStation Vita consoles. This was a
Data.
peculiar choice. Beyond the difficulty of creating games for the PlayStation 3, the markets for EVE Online and first-person shooter games for consoles were remarkably different. While both attracted primarily male audiences, EVE's player base skewed older and was more interested in detailed space simulation gameplay, while console shooters were typically played by younger men who desired faster, more immediate experiences, and those in the latter audience were largely unaware of EVE. Many EVE players who otherwise might have had interest in Dust 514 didn't own a PlayStation or were unwilling to pay for the console specifically for Dust. Still, there was hope that others interested in the setting would play Dust to engage with the space sandbox. But the goodwill
So they can
and hope of
use
EVE's
the
player
shooting
base would be
guys.
shaken during an incident that would capture the attention not only of those in New Eden, but the broader gaming public.
The fact that it didn't come on
No,
PC.
pause.
What?
It's kind of crazy. They like, if you want to, like, as a corporation, take over a planet, you have to hire like some random children who playing on the PlayStation 3 this random game.
Well, I mean, there's other ways to take over planets. Like you could also just like shoot it down. But
Yeah, shoot it down.
or I mean, you could do it the old-fashioned way in EVE. But like if you wanted to, yeah, it is not being on PC is a huge blunder. Yeah, because EVE. Bomb it from orbit. I think that I mean there are I forgot that there were planets that you can like inhabit and like there's a lot of shit in this fucking game, but
Yeah, I didn't even remember them talking about that.
but the fact that that game Dust 514 wasn't on PC alongside EVE is such a fucking like what?
Yeah, bizarre.
Also, what do you mean older? Like these guys must have been like in their in the 2000s, like 2010s, like early 30s, late 20s.
We're in like 2009 right now, I think.
Okay, so these guys, if they were playing since 2003, they must have been like mid 20s playing with like teenagers.
It's only 6 years at that point.
Yeah, they can fucking communicate. Like it's not like they speak a different language entirely. It's like what? I don't know why Fred made it seem like that. Like I mean, I don't know, but
What, that they can't communicate with the PS3 players?
well, no, it's just that it's like there's a disconnect between the older players and the kids that were playing these shooting games. Like
I think there totally would be. You can't talk to them.
I guess yeah, you
Those
can't really
children.
organize with them. Yeah, I mean it's fair.
It's 2009. They're not the PlayStation shooter kids aren't going on like fucking
That's fair. Yeah,
Reddit
that's fair.
or wherever online to chat with people playing EVE Online.
That's fair. Give me 1 second.
All good.
Okay.
On June 22nd, 2011, Crowd Control Productions released one of their most anticipated expansions, Incarna. Renamed from Walking in Stations, Incarna promised a new level of immersion for EVE players by allowing them to control their character
literally called
avatars
Walking in
directly,
Stations.
and after years of advertisement, expectations were high. This was also an expansion that had drawn significant resources from other projects, as many developers had been moved from other aspects of the game and other games entirely in order to create
who the
this
fuck is that?
expansion. Blogger Wilhelm Arcturus writes in retrospect that, quote, to get this feature, they had to not only forego working on other more core issues to the game, but pretty much had to rob the World of Darkness team of resources as well, end quote. But the immediate reception to the new additions was mixed. Many of the features promised with Incarna were missing to be
their
added at a
new
later
logo
date,
is cool.
and what was made available, while
modernized.
tantalizing, was paltry compared to the scope that Crowd Control Productions envisioned and had projected onto the player base. The two main features were a new, robust character customization process, which players could use to update their avatars, and the Captain's Quarters, which acted as a replacement for the efficient menus that players once had in their hangars. Instead, players were now required to ambulate their character models through a special room where finicky menus could be activated. In a game where menuing accounted for much of the experience, this significantly slowed the process. What's more, computer performance in this area was notably worse than the rest of the game, further hampering a now unfamiliar method of gameplay. The loneliness of the space was heightened by a locked door that promised to one day be opened so that players could enter the rest of the station and interact with other players outside of their ships in bars, clubs, and others' rooms.
Wait, that was already promised, but then they fucking do this shit first? Like, this didn't need an update. Like, the menus, like, having to, like, walk around to access menus. Like,
it seems unnecessary.
The thing that I think would have been cool, even though a lot of people didn't care for it, was like a social... Like, being able to hang out in your ship with, like, other players, and, like, you know, like, like, that would be cool. Just, you know, to, like, you know, operate different things in the ship or whatever, but, I don't know. I don't even know if, like, the ships are, like, how many people can, like, operate a ship? Do we know that?
I think it's one person per ship. Right? I think that's the way it works. It seems like you control the movement of a ship by just clicking. So it's not very complicated. It doesn't require more than one person, it seems like.
No, someone said something about ship crews. Ship room for 2. Nothing. There's no controlling multiple ships or cargo ships. I guess there's different ships for different things, and I guess different like fighter ships maybe only one person needs, but like cruisers can range from anywhere between 5 to 800 crew depending on class. Okay, so there are multiple people per ship, I think then. It's weird.
I'll look into
Rooms. While not all players were fundamentally opposed to the introduction of the captain's quarters, its practicality was suspect, and most players opted instead for a more traditional view of their critical menus, foregoing the avatar-centric method of navigation that had been a core focus of this new development for half a decade. However, rather than being returned to the hangar view that had become a core part of EVE's aesthetic since its release, featuring the player's active ship in the center of the screen, players were instead shown a static angle of the locked station door, removing functionality from what had once been the hangar.
Depressing.
Despite being the chief focus of development, the captain's quarters would not be the feature that would attract the most attention. Along with a more robust character creator, there were now cosmetic options for players to purchase using currency bought with real-world fiat money. However, the prices for some goods were viewed as egregious. EVE News 24 wrote, quote, "Head over to the EVE Online forums or other EVE-related sites, and it won't take you long to figure out how much buzz has been made over the fact that a monocle, or even a measly shirt, is worth more than a faction-fitted battleship, a couple of plexes, or even more than the retail box version of the EVE Online game. Enter the not-so-noble exchange shop, proof that once again CCP loses grasp of reality, as is shown by prices on the new Vanity Shop, with products like a whopping $60 for that now infamous monocle, the $22 shirt, or the designer boots, all of which might be a bit too much for many reasonable players."
That's
End quote.
what?
Players began generally expressing that this would only be
nuts.
the beginning of aggressive monetization on the part of Crowd Control Productions. Such suspicions were seemingly confirmed that same month when an issue of the internal company magazine Fearless was leaked, titled "Greed is Good." The first
Isn't that
page,
Martin
written by the
Sheen?
editor Perry Desai,
know.
reads in part, quote, "As a subscription-based golden goose, EVE needs to incorporate the virtual goods sales model to allow for further revenue. Revenue to fund our other titles. Revenue for its developer."
That wasn't Martin
A
Sheen, that was a
particular
different
article
actor.
written
We
by the
need
company's principal
we need
game
your
designer,
money so we
Kjartan
can do
Emelson,
other
discusses
things,
the way
and
that player
then just
attachment
end
to
up
virtual
giving the
goods
money
can
back to
create
EVE.
capital. Quote, "An interesting aspect of selling experience and identity is that the actual action of paying for it can strengthen their perceived value. This is in many
Who
ways
wrote
because
that?
of the
The
way we are
actual
raised
action.
as consumers. We shop,
Go back to
therefore
school,
we
you
are.
cunt.
Fashion is a beautiful example of this. When
We
buying
love
nice
fashion.
clothes, we might feel more desirable and confident, and in this way, the act
You
of
can't
buying
visit
can actually be a
planets in
factor
EVE.
to
There are
make
no
your
bases,
experience
cities, or
more
NPCs to
meaningful,
visit. You
or
don't
your
explore
identity
planets, you
stronger,
explore
and as
solar
such, it
systems in the
becomes more
EVE universe
competitive
called New
with other
Eden.
alternatives.
If you have a
The act of
PlayStation, you can
buying
play
is a
Dust
powerful
514,
psychological
and
pattern
the battles you
deeply
fight
rooted
will
in
be
all of
set
us,
on
whether
some of
we
the
like
planets
it
are
or
found
not.
in
The pure
Losec.
subscription model for games, even though quite well suited for the selling
I
of
see.
holistic experiences, takes little advantage of this part of human nature. Many players will actually voice the opinion that adding any kind of consumerism to such a game will ruin their experience. Those same players will buy Plex without any qualms to get instant access to that ship they just need to have right now, and they might even go as far as buying a $500 leather jacket that matches the one their avatar is wearing. A balanced approach should acknowledge consumerism as a powerful game design tool, amongst others, that we need to get familiar with, and that should be used carefully and with respect to create more enjoyable experiences and stronger identities for our players. If successful, this will result in their increased emotional attachment to our product and services for the benefit of all. If not, we run the risk
Planets
of
are
sucking
only,
our customers dry and
for
leaving
mining.
their shriveled corpses by the
It wasn't
side of the
until
road to the benefit of none.
the Dust
End quote.
game
The debate portion
where you could
featured
take over
noticeably
planets.
little debate. Both employees writing for the piece, who had been approached and requested to support a given side, espoused the value of virtual cosmetic sales for real money, disagreeing only on the measure of tangible in-game advantage that should be allowed for purchase. The writer for the Yes portion, a game designer named Christopher Toberg, wrote about his experience with the player base and their opinions on the matter. Quote, "I would like virtual goods sales in EVE. In fact, I'd like to sell a lot more than vanity items. Does this mean I'm an evil capitalist that, unless stopped, will cause the entire company to catch fire and be buried at sea by a secret team of Navy SEALs? Let's hope not, although that's the impression I get sometimes when interacting with our customers. There is a pretty overwhelming perception amongst EVE players that these changes are bad. I think they're brilliant, but our players don't. We're going to face an uphill struggle, and the reason many of us never talk about this publicly is that we'd be burned at the stake by the players. I don't really understand the logic behind it."
Fucking
End quote. A later part of the feature states that the company was suggesting selling faction standings, an important limiting aspect of the game. Speaking of Dust 514, a header reads, "Next summer, people will be flocking to play Dust 514. There will be an entrance fee, but we will make sure to also provide some proverbial free towels. We will be charging for the swimming goggles, though." Towards the end, it discusses the
What does that mean?
inevitability of charging players for in-game advantages for the upcoming World of Darkness. Quote, "Escalation of commitment is another key concept for the value of virtual goods sales. When a person has put time, effort, or money into something, she's more likely to be attached. If players can spend more money directly on our game, their enjoyment will heighten, and they'll bond more strongly with it." After discussing strategies to allow players to purchase an appropriate amount of in-game power, it concludes by stating, "The question of virtual goods sales is not to do or not to do. Rather, it's how do we do this? For the yet unpublished World of Darkness, the details are foggy, but the philosophy is strong." End quote. When this company magazine was leaked to the public, gaming news outlets immediately began covering it, and the community was outraged. Players took their ships to Jeddah, the trade hub of all of New Eden, and began firing at a prominent invulnerable statue to show their displeasure in a visible fashion. But arguably, the more impactful action was when thousands of players canceled their monthly subscription. Some resolved that they would do so for as long as was necessary for Crowd Control Productions to change their
Damn,
minds.
people
while
united.
others decided that, with this new
Different
direction that the company
factions
was taking,
united.
the good days of EVE Online were over, and it was time to move on to other games, or from gaming entirely. When an internal letter from
That's a
CEO
little dramatic.
Hilmar Pedersen was leaked, stating that this reaction was to be expected and that the players were simply
you guys
resisting
fix your
change,
game or I'm gonna
the player
stop
base was
gaming.
only emboldened, and the protests continued, beginning what would be known either as the Summer of Rage or the more reductive Monocle Gate,
Multiple
after the
crew-
exorbitant price of
multiple
the
crew
Monocle
is Star
cosmetic
Citizen,
item
pretty
in
sure.
the
I don't know
store.
if that
Despite
was
the
Eve's
hopes and
thing.
expectations
I don't
of
know.
company management, the protest showed no signs of stopping 4 months later, even after a discussion with the Council of Stellar Management. In an effort to placate their player base, Hilmar released a long,
We
don't-
apologetic
we don't
letter
want-
which
we
opened
don't
with
want
plaintive
fashion.
prose. Quote, "Dear followers of EVE Online, the past few months have been very humbling for me. I've done much soul-searching, and what follows is my sincere effort to clear the air with all of you. Please bear with me as I find my way through. The estrangement from CCP that many
Please
of you
bear
have
with
been
me
feeling
as
of
I
late
get
is
out
my
of
fault,
my
and for that I am
swimming
truly
pool of
sorry.
money.
There are many contributing factors, but in the end, it is
So
I who must
apologize.
shoulder the responsibility for much of what has happened. In short, my zeal for pushing Eve to her true potential made me lose sight of doing the simple things right. I was wrong, and I admit it." End quote. The rest of the letter
Hilmar.
consisted of points of failure perceived by the player base and copious apologies. However sincere these apologies may have been, it was not enough to entirely reverse the negative perception of the company. A press release 2 weeks later revealed that what they had once internally referred to as a golden goose had stopped being quite so lucrative, and they would be reorganizing their company significantly, including laying off a fifth of their workforce. They explained that, quote, "For the immediate future, our mission is to enrich the vast EVE universe by strengthening the continuous development of EVE Online while preparing to bring Dust 514 to market on the PS3. We do this in order to realize our ambitious and challenging plan of joining the two in a cross-platform, truly massive online world. World of Darkness will continue development with a significantly reduced team. This team will continue to iterate and expand on the gameplay and systems they have designed. We will also redeploy creative teams in Atlanta to support the launch of Dust 514. End quote. But the purported gameplay and systems for World of Darkness were in a questionable state. Per the Guardian article, quote, there seemed to be no clear vision on
Why
how
do
the
they have to
various
change
parts would
things?
create a
Games were
cohesive
already
end product.
lucrative.
Sources
Yeah.
report that the game effectively reached alpha, the stage at which all the major features have been implemented, 3 times, only for each version to be scrapped. End quote. Despite confidently claiming that they still had more EVE subscribers than a year prior, it was now clear that the expectations of the executives at the company had been severely curtailed. Now, they would have to desperately struggle to maintain what they still had in EVE Online. While the state of the company would have a significant impact on the game as a whole, the conflicts in Nullsec would continue unabated. While nestling itself into its new home region of Delve, Goonswarm recognized that it would need allies in order to weather any upcoming wars, given their penchant for angering
Back
other
to the
groups of
actual
players.
game.
And so, they organized what they named the Cluster Coalition, consisting of numerous nearby corporations, often gathered together not due to affable relations with one another, but rather due to common enemies. The animosity between these groups is difficult to overstate. On the verifiable end of the spectrum, players would locate spies and, upon tracing their IP addresses, would publicly post
What?
their identifying information, including
Dox
their full
them?
name and address, in order to threaten them. This became a common
Okay,
occurrence, for
Goonswarm
which
is
certain
the
leaders
trolls
became
are
known.
still more
Even
assholes
extreme
than Band of
allegations would
Wait,
Brothers.
that
arise
was
over
go
time,
back. That
though
was
their
Goon Squad.
veracity
That was
is
Goon Squad who's doing that.
Yeah. Okay. So the trolls are still trolls.
Who were they doxing? Who were they doxing?
People that were against them, I guess. But it's where Band of Brothers was like, first it was, oh, Goonswarm sucks. Then Band of Brothers, like, basically cheated. And now Goonswarm is like the big bad.
Like the big asshole.
Yeah. So you can colonize planets for basically just mining. That's really it. Like you can't. But like, how do you take planets away from other people? That's what I want to know. I guess it is just.
We will never know everything about this game. Even with this video, we will never know everything. You know. Are you there?
Yeah, it's partially integrated with Eve, and okay, whatever.
Another, but rather due to common enemies. The animosity between these groups is difficult to overstate. On the verifiable end of the spectrum, players would locate spies and, upon tracing their IP addresses, would publicly
Spies.
post their identifying.
It's so spies
spies.
in there, so they would. Okay, very good.
So I guess after that fucking big subterfuge that killed Band of Brothers,
They don't
like,
want that to happen to them.
fucking corporate espionage is like a big thing, which I fucking love. By the way, I love that that's a big thing. Corporate espionage.
That is funny.
I wonder how that even works. You just pretend that you're a fucking.
Yeah, teams of Dust players could take on mercenary contracts and need to fight battles with limited implications within Eve. So they don't.
Limited implications.
What was the connection between them? It wasn't planets. Dust players could also work together with E players in capturing systems. So you
That's
don't.
more than planets. That's
Yeah, so you don't take over the planets. You basically, I guess two factions can like put a lot of money. Like basically, it's just another way to fight. Because you're not taking over the planets. Like I'm guessing there's an infinite amount of planets that you could pull resources from, but you fight on planets. Basically, it's basically two factions throwing money at these like kids playing on the PS3, and eventually, like when one side runs out of resources, then I guess they just stop. Like that's the best way I could describe it. It's interesting though.
Including
They
their
just
full
pull
name
out
and
and
address
let the
in
other
order
team
to
wins.
threaten them.
Yeah, I
This
guess.
became a common occurrence, for which certain leaders became known. Even more extreme allegations would arise over time, though
pretty
their
funny, though.
veracity is in question. For example, in 2009, the Mittani wrote an article for 10 Ton Hammer in which he stated, quote, "About 2 years ago, Goonswarm was aiding our allies, Red Alliance, in the invasion of the Scalding Pass region against Lotka Volterra and their coalition. Lotka Volterra had unveiled one of the first Titans against us to catastrophic consequences, and at the time these profoundly silly ships were nearly impossible to kill through legitimate in-game means. They were essentially
Yo,
invulnerable,
pause.
with the only Titans..."
What?
It's called Lotka Volterra. What the fuck?
That's not how you spell it.
How do you spell it?
It's with an A.
Oh.
Yeah. but I appreciate
I'm feeling Jewish.
the
today.
the Jewish faction, dude. Fucking they want to
That's
take
a Hanukkah thing, right? Latkes are for Hanukkah. It's Hanukkah right now.
they're yeah, it's a Hanukkah thing. I think they're made for like other they could be made for like Passover too.
Occasions.
Oh no, they can't cuz they're that's carbs. That's true.
I don't know how that works.
Oh wait,
Sounds like you're going into some fucking
yeah, never mind. But I the fucking
sick shit.
the fucking they control all the fucking moon
They
I don't
control all the carbs.
no, I'm talking about it in Eve, like the
Yeah, I know.
just like I don't know, like a bunch of like Ashkenazi Jews, they just control like just huge amounts of star systems.
Oh, the Jews.
Yeah, they fucking
Yes, I like to believe that too. My people are powerful again.
yeah, they know how to haggle. We know how to haggle. And I don't know if it's indicative of your stream, but I got 2 back-to-back ads about cat litter.
Yeah, sorry, I did that on purpose. I
Uh,
just want you to look at cat shit.
I've been fucking with cat litter recently, just because
I've been fucking boxes of cat litter, dog.
I do have
It's
cat.
like the best experience.
destroyed through catching the ship while the pilot was disconnected from the game. It was determined that the Enslaver and his Avatar-class Titan had to go. I was approached by one of the leaders of Red Alliance to help make this happen, but almost immediately we were down the rabbit hole. Much to my surprise, the Red
Hey!
Alliance director didn't want in-game
That's funny.
information from me. He wanted us to use the forensic resources of our intelligence.
That's the whole
agency
reason why
to
he
track
did this
down
video,
the
is because they
Enslaver's
mentioned
home address.
that.
At a
You
coordinated
should've zoomed
time,
in on
armed
it
with
when
this
he-
He
information,
should have, but
a
that's not
Russian
his
alliance
style.
member was
Unfortunately, that's
able
not.
to
Yeah, it's really
power
not,
to the
yeah.
Enslaver's house in the real
I would have
world,
done that
and
easily.
the
I would've-
Alliance capital
if he'd
fleet
done that, I
to
would've
assault the
died.
abruptly pilotless Titan. Yikes.
So who is this guy? 2 years ago,
Frederick?
Goon Swarm. This is the spy master, who
Oh, this guy? I have no idea.
2 years ago Goon Swarm was aiding our allies, Red Alliance. Is he like talking as if he is Goon Swarm?
If you really want to go back, you can go back.
I'm gonna just look this up. I'm sorry.
As one can imagine,
wrote
I
this?
demurred, but the Russian alliance director didn't want to take no for an answer, and I didn't fancy telling him that I thought he was completely insane. I said that I'd look into it, and that's when things began to get really crazy. Kugutsumen got involved. Kugutsumen is a French national living in Jakarta, Indonesia, who was convicted as a teenager in the early 1990s of freaking the FBI's conference call system and running up $250,000 in international calls. He copped a ban from CCP years ago for breaking the T20 scandal after
the
penetrating the Band of Brothers director forums, but it
This is
seems the
Spanish.
banning
This is just
completely
Spanish
removed
to
all
me.
restraint on his behavior regarding the game. He set up his own forum to cover
A French guy living in Indonesia who was convicted as a teenager in the early 1990s. So this guy right now has got to be in his 40s. Right
Of
now.
freaking the FBI.
What does that mean? Let me
Yo,
see.
he's freaking them. He's fucking them.
Fraud. It's just fraud.
He's getting freaky on them.
Fraudulent manipulation of telephone signaling in order to make free phone calls. Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's not that big a
And
deal,
he-
to
he
be honest.
copped a
That's
what is it? He copped a ban from CCP years ago for breaking the
T20 scandal after penetrating the Band of Brothers director
Fucking
forums.
Spanish.
T20 scandal after penetrating.
Habla español.
I'm guess. Well, it's okay. Higher ups in Band of Brothers. He broke into their forum but it seems the ban completely removed all restraint on his behavior regarding the game. He set up his own forum to cover the hidden news of EVE by publishing snippets from forums of other alliances. Okay, so this is just like
It's a dude who makes a little Eve, like he made his own forum.
I guess who.
Keep him playing. I'm good.
For the hidden news of EVE by publishing snippets from the forums of other alliances. Why didn't I have to deal with the Red Alliance trying to cut the power to the Enslaver's house to kill his Titan? Because Kugutsumen, out of either idle curiosity or malice aforethought, traced the Enslaver's IP addresses back to Iceland, confronted him on Lotka Volterra's TeamSpeak while under an assumed name, recorded the conversation, and then outed him as a GM and a CCP employee. End quote. But to the northeast in late 2011,
Why are there so many
the Russians,
CCP
having once
employees
been
playing the
relatively
game, though?
united, had again split due to internal divisions between the leaders of major powers, often involving what was known as RMT, or real money.
The guy, the Spy Master guy, he is the de facto head of Goon Swarm. So he was talking as if he was, and earlier, I guess he was talking. This is just so confusing. 2 years ago, Goon Swarm was aiding our allies, Red Alliance. Or from rats with invasion.
Wait, you're saying it's that Icelandic guy, the
No.
the Band of Brothers?
No, this guy, the Spy Master, was just talking about some shit.
But the guy who ended Band of Brothers.
Yes, like he
Betrayed
betrayed Band of
for
Brothers,
which certain
basically.
leaders became known.
He
Even
wrote
more
that.
extreme allegations would arise over time, though their veracity is in question. For example, in 2009, the Mittani wrote an article for 10 Ton Hammer in which he stated, quote, "About 2 years ago,
Oh,
Goon
Mittani's
Swarm
just
was
a guy
aiding
from
our
Goon Squad.
allies, Red Alliance, in the invasion of the Scalding Pass region against Lotka Volterra and their coalition. Lotka Volterra had unveiled one of the first Titans against us to catastrophic consequences, and at the time these profoundly silly ships were nearly impossible to kill."
He's just talking about a time him and Goon Swarm were allied with Red Alliance, the Russians.
Kutsumen is a French national living in Jakarta. His conference call system and running up $250,000 in international calls. He copped a ban from CCP years ago for breaking the T20 scandal after penetrating the Band of Brothers director forums, but it seems the banning completely removed all restraint on his behavior regarding the game. He set up his own forum to cover the hidden news of EVE by publishing snippets from the forums of other alliances. Why didn't I have to deal with the Red Alliance trying to cut the power to the Enslaver's house to kill his Titan? Because Kugutsumen, out of either idle curiosity or malice aforethought, traced the Enslaver's IP addresses back to Iceland, confronted him on Lotka Volterra's TeamSpeak while under an assumed name, recorded the conversation, and then outed
Discord
him as a
before
GM
Discord.
and a CCP
Remember
employee.
TeamSpeak?
End quote.
No.
But to the northeast in late
Basically, Discord
2011,
before
the
Discord.
Russians, having once been relatively united, had again split due to internal
I had a
divisions
TeamSpeak
between
account
the
very
leaders of
briefly.
major powers, often involving what was known as RMT, or real money trading.
used TeamSpeak when
another
I
name
played
for the black market
Gmod.
economy in which wealthy players would exchange their in-game ISK for real money. Accounts from different players.
People are always
conflict
gonna
on
wanna
the
choose,
prolificacy
like,
of this
the
practice,
less
with some
popular
leaders
option of
claiming
something
that it
that's
was a rare
popular.
occurrence, while others stated
'Cause I
that
remember
nearly
TeamSpeak
every
was-
person with a leadership position in every major alliance participated in RMT to some degree. The desire to sell ISK for real-world fiat currency was heightened for those in leadership positions who had accumulated more wealth than they could feasibly spend, and there was always a temptation to raid a corporation or alliance's assets and sell them. Many large alliances were making remarkable amounts of money by renting space controlled by the alliance to smaller corporations. An article for Gamer Tribute describes some of the conflicts of interest. Quote, "Certain players were rumored to make thousands of dollars in real life through RMT operations, which meant threatening renter space put real-life income sources at risk for some players." End quote. While it's impossible to say for certain, the Russians had a reputation of partaking in RMT far more than other groups, which made a massive heist in July of 2011 only more bitter. A trusted and well-known leader in a Russian corporation stole nearly 1 trillion ISK worth of goods and cash, including 2,400 plex valued alone at approximately $42,000. This would not stand, and the Russian federations, who had once been relatively peaceful, fractured and declared war on one another. As these wars raged, fleet commanders began to experiment with wormholes as tactical tools, especially as an escape route in case a fight was going badly. However, given the relative unfamiliarity with wormholes, nullsec corporations would sometimes make grievous errors born from ignorance of this chaotic space. For example, after losing a fight, the elite members of Pandemic Legion, closely affiliated with Mercenary Coalition, hid their heavy battle fleet in a wormhole. However, the combined mass of their ships was too great for the wormhole to remain stable, and it collapsed behind them. None of the 46 characters who made it through the wormhole was equipped with the probes necessary to navigate a way out of wormhole space, and so, with little knowledge of wormholes, they decided instead to simply destroy one another's ships and respawn back home. Elsewhere, the dissolving of familiar alliances meant that old
That's such
enemies
a waste
after
of
the
money.
war
Lose the
were
shit on
far
the
more
ships.
vulnerable.
That's such a waste of money.
You don't lose all the shit that was on the ships?
Decided instead to
guess.
simply destroy one another's ships and respawn back home. Elsewhere, the dissolving of familiar alliances meant that old enemies after the war were far more vulnerable, and wars began to break out all across Nullsec, with wild border adjustments on a regular basis. Not even Goonswarm was able to hold on to its prize of Delve. As these wars became larger in scope and game-related writing began to resemble more traditional news outlets, web traffic began to funnel into more professionally produced operations, but these outlets were often controlled by groups with special interests, most obviously the Mittani, a website owned and operated by its namesake, with writers creating all kinds of media. On November 13, 2012, the blog Evaganda wrote, quote, "The Mittani has killed Eve blogging. Why read through dozens of sites when you can just visit one? You get features, news, opinion, and the unquestionable loyalty of the largest single block of players in-game, fed daily through forum support that rivals none other. I've been approached 3 times to write for the Mittani. The first was back before it launched, and the most recent was by the very same Mark Scaris that now poses the question of what to do with these blogging features. It is no mistake that other community-involved bloggers are also involved in that site. By the way, I turned all 3 of those requests down flat. Personally, I can't support the Mittani or the goons behind him. I don't link to the site here, nor will I ever do so. That is a role-playing choice primarily, but it is also because I knew full well what that thing's coming meant. And here we are. And it is only natural. Things change, remember? Eve is getting close to being a decade old. It is as predictable as the sun rising and setting that eventually something like that site would appear." End quote. But while both media outlets for game news and the alliances in Nullsec were inexorably progressing toward a greater homogeneity, the players in wormhole space continued to establish themselves. Over time, they had discovered more and more about their chosen home, some facts being more esoteric than others, and this knowledge would turn this churning, chaotic hellscape into a verdant home replete with valuable minerals and friendly rivals. One of the most important habits adopted by early players was the mapping of wormhole space. Players from different corporations would be tasked with traveling through wormholes, taking note of what existed there, such as enemy bases or collectible resources, and sharing this information with the others, so that the immediate vicinity around their home system would be known, the connections spider-webbing out, with some branches terminating back into normal K-space. Due to the transient nature of the wormholes, these maps would have to be updated constantly, and they were closely guarded so as not to be used against their makers. However, players quickly discovered methods by which they could, to some extent, control this space. By sending heavy ships back and forth through wormholes in just the right patterns, wormholes could be coaxed into collapsing prematurely, while guaranteeing that no ship would be stranded on the far side, a practice known as rolling a hole. These tactics could be used both defensively and aggressively. A corporation with access to a static hole could purposefully collapse it again and again, searching for targets. A static hole that linked to other wormhole space systems could serve as a way to search for new resource nodes from which to gather, or it could be a way to search for other corporations with whom to engage in affable combat for entertainment. But those outside of wormhole space came to know them for a different practice. If a wormhole corporation gained access to a nullsec static, then they could quietly use it to search.
Sorry, fiat was the subscription thing, right?
I don't have a clue. Fiat is a car.
The fucking money that the Russians were pissing about. That was just like that was
RMT. They got that through RMT, which is what they use to turn ISK into money. I think. I don't know what fiat is.
I thought that was like the pilot's license thing or something.
No, pilot's license is just the in-game item that lets you renew your subscription.
Right, but it also had like real world currency, and they could like trade it and
Yeah,
sell
it
it.
has real world value, but everything has real world value in the game, right?
Yeah, but that was the only one that had like actual like tangible value.
I think everything does. Like everything in the game that's tangible, like ships and shit.
RMT is if you are buying in-game assets with real money on third-party sites or trading ISK outside of the game. Oh, they're on other third-party sites. They're exchanging their ISK for.
Yeah, it stands for real money trading, right?
Yeah, okay. So there's probably stuff like that for like other games, but because of the nature of Eve, it's probably more valuable in Eve than anywhere. So, pilot's license is Plex, right?
For ripe targets. Once a proper target
That's
was
what I meant.
spotted, a small raiding fleet would burst forth from the wormhole and begin raiding the surrounding space, destroying ships and looting until a response fleet could be organized. Given the relative power of nullsec corporations and the size and mass restrictions imposed by the wormholes, it was common for such response fleets to substantially outclass the raiding bands from the wormhole corporations, and so, upon sighting them, the raiders would retreat back through their wormhole, disappearing into the labyrinth. The relative secrecy and aggressive demeanor of the average wormholer placed them at odds with the nullsec empires, and over time, the two came to regard one another as bitter enemies, the nullsec alliances relying on stability and strength, and the wormholers embracing disorder and agility. Despite the equalizing forces of wormhole space, it still harbored its own elite, and they tended to occupy the C6 wormhole systems, the most dangerous and also the most valuable. The higher class systems tended to have unique stellar bodies, such as black holes and pulsars, which could dramatically alter certain statistics about ships, making them even more difficult to assail, as their denizens would specialize their ships to utilize these peculiar features fully for defensive purposes.
It's crazy
Their
that
ships
CCP
funded by
like
the
added
valuable
shit like that.
resources
Like, oh
there
yeah,
and
in this
the wormhole
particular
systems
area
that
of the
tended to
map,
link
we
to
added
them.
this thing.
These larger corporations naturally became targets for others looking for a good fight. The most well-known example was the corporation Rooks and Kings, who delighted in discovering ways to push the game to its limits, and their French corporation, Guillotine Therapy, who primarily lived in wormhole space.
Very
Their YouTube
appropriate.
series, named Clarion Call, attracted the attention even of those outside of the game, as their stories of frustrating the efforts of much larger corporations became legendary. In particular, they became known for a unique tactic: pipe bombing. By outfitting a small fleet of battleships with smart bombs and equipping defensive modules that allowed them to resist the particular kind of damage that the smart bombs produced, they could effectively destroy any intercepted enemy fleet while remaining mostly intact. This was made possible in part due to the rigid habits of fleet commanders in nullsec corporations, who were predictable enough for these strategies to continue to work for months. But even as great powers were establishing themselves, there was a new, unorthodox section of EVE Online growing faster than any other: the casinos. By sending ISK to trusted banker characters, players
Yes,
could
the
exchange their
casinos.
in-game money for tokens to be used on gambling websites, much like chips at a real-life casino. And soon,
There's
players with
Biplex.
vast stores of liquid assets and nothing else on which to spend them would gamble large amounts for entertainment. The money being funneled through these websites was massive and only growing day by day. But all of this was contingent upon Crowd Control Productions managing their game while simultaneously launching further games, something that would prove to be a titanic struggle.
Kamikaze plans with one-ups. Yeah.
On May 22nd, 2013, Crowd Control Productions finally released their first-person shooter game, Dust 514. The game had been given limited beta releases throughout the previous year, but it was difficult to gauge what the final game would feel like after it was integrated into its parent game of EVE Online. But the nature of its existence made it difficult to penetrate. For casual players, the links between Dust and EVE weren't immediately apparent, and while the connection appeared to have worked well, the people who were downloading and playing Dust often did so not knowing that there was much, if any, connection to EVE. This could likely be attributed to the game's distribution method. As the game was made free to play by download on the PlayStation 3, many first-person shooter enthusiasts downloaded it to test, with little further understanding or research, expecting
Without
familiar
realizing
fare.
what they
But the
had
game
done.
that greeted
I
them
mean,
was
pause for
significantly
1
less
second.
accessible.
It seems so stupid that they would release it like exclusively for the PS3 when Eve is exclusive for the PC.
Yeah,
because,
we said the
But like Eve's player base is so fucking dedicated to Eve. Like they're not gonna play it. They're like if it's on PC, like they're not gonna like. Why would they not play it? Like,
yeah. That, I know. There were definitely some people that were, uh, there were definitely some people that were like
and
really
it's
into Eve.
integrated into Eve.
Yeah,
like,
there's definitely some people that were like about that life, that they bought a PS3 and got this game because it was free. You know.
Yeah, but it's not. It's not going to be like the majority of people that are buying a PS3 because.
I mean,
play Eve.
I figured that like some like alliance leaders.
But of course they're going to exist. Yeah.
Yeah, that would take that shit seriously. Would want to get in on that.
Well, than a typical game in the genre. Chris Carter, writing for online gaming magazine Destructoid, described his initial experience. Quote, "For everyone else who is not already an Eve fan, you're going to see it as another first-person shooter, and it will most likely not blow you away. In fact, as soon as I actually booted up my first skirmish, I was immediately underwhelmed. The environments, the guns, the visuals, everything but the stylized character models was extremely basic, to the point where at times it looks like a previous generation title. I experienced major frame rate issues, so much so that it affected my ability to see vehicles in the distance. At times, the game seemed to run well below 30 frames per second. I also experienced a decent amount of lag during my time with Dust, which is obviously a problem with an FPS, especially if you're fond of long-range combat." End quote. IGN's Vince Ingenito was similarly unimpressed. Quote, "The actual shooting isn't up to snuff. Similar games like Battlefield 3 succeeded by making it fun to fight both on foot and in vehicles, but Dust struggles to even make firing a gun feel right, much less vehicle combat. Now, I don't claim to be an expert marksman, but I had more trouble keeping my sights on target in Dust than in any FPS in recent memory. Part of this is due to the mushy aiming controls, which are too sluggish for quick turns, yet too jumpy to track moving targets reliably. Sloppy, protracted firefights result, leaving my enemies and I to dance endlessly around each other, emptying our clips without scoring a kill. After playing with controls as tightly refined as those in Call of Duty, Battlefield, and countless other shooters, Dusts feel terribly antiquated. In fact, very little works or feels like it should in Dust 514. The maps are laid out well enough for combat, with some great verticality at times, but the limited detail and variety of the environments keep it from ever feeling like you're planet hopping for glory and profit." End quote. Even Ian Hertzberg from 10 Ton Hammer, who reviewed the game positively, said that, quote, "So far, I've felt like I was mostly making contact with Dust 514 players and found very little influence from EVE Online spilling over into the game. Which is a shame because the idea of the two games interacting seems cool in theory, but in practice, Dust 514 feels more like a standalone game."
Yeah, that's just
End
a
quote.
baffling
These
choice
limited
to me.
connections between the games hadn't been solved half a year later when GameSpot's Nick Capozzoli wrote in
It must be that
December of
Sony
that
just
year
paid
that,
them $1 billion
quote,
to make
Dust's
it
link to
exclusive.
EVE was supposed to provide the context for these endless war games, but the bond between the two games remains ill-defined. Corporations, the lifeblood of EVE, barely receive an introduction in Dust. End quote. The tepid reception of Dust 514 likely had a severe effect on the morale of employees at the company, who had watched 20% of their coworkers be laid off only a few years prior.
Of course.
Significant resources had been redirected from the highly anticipated World of Darkness MMO in order to complete this game, and with the severe impact that the Summer of Rage had inflicted upon the revenue of Crowd Control Productions, those who had been assigned to the project were nervous. This also boded poorly for other projects that the company had announced. In August of 2013, CCP had announced the development of a new space dogfighting game for VR, which they named EVE Valkyrie. Again hoping to act as an innovator in the gaming space, as the founding team had with Vermal and EVE Online, the project was originally a demo developed by employees, and now they had been flown to Britain in order to work on expanding it into a full game. But Valkyrie was slated for a 2014 release, only a year later. In comparison, the tenuous fate of World of Darkness threatened nearly a decade of work. These fears would prove founded in April of 2014, when World of Darkness was officially cancelled. According to The Guardian, this was unsurprising for members of the team
EVE
who had been
Online,
anticipating this
thank you.
decision since the layoffs after the Summer of Rage in 2011. Allegedly, the World of Darkness team had been the most thoroughly impacted.
The
An
World
anonymous
of
source noted that,
Darkness.
quote, "The The 2011
even remember
layoffs
what that
incited a
was.
lot of anger.
It's a game that another game
lot.
they're working on.
I heard it was worse in the
Yeah,
ATL
but
office,
that they
and most
canceled.
of
I
the
don't
folks I
remember what it
know
was
down
supposed
there
to
have
They
never
canceled 'cause
forgiven
they
CCP's management.
They brought all the guys working on that to
2013
Eve.
saw 15 more layoffs,
now it's a
leaving
dust.
56 team members going into the following
Oh,
year,
yeah.
a
And Eve,
paltry
yeah,
number
and
for the
Eve.
production of a new MMO. Those 56 remaining in April were either moved to other projects or laid off as well. Many had come from the original White Wolf team when the company was bought. Not all of the work from the game had been entirely lost. For example, much of the character creator had been adjusted and ported to EVE Online for players to update their avatars, a system that proved remarkably robust, but was only a fragment of the work that had been made for World of Darkness. With the middling release of Dust 514 and the complete collapse of World of Darkness, Crowd Control Productions was now reliant
keep
upon
thinking of
maintaining
Kingdom
EVE
Hearts, I'm
Online,
sorry.
which they were struggling to manage
Yeah, that's
after the
fair.
release of Incarna. But those on the outside would see little of this struggle. Instead, they would bear witness to the largest conflict that any virtual world had ever seen.
Of course. Why am I not surprised? Real quick as a refresher, the Nah, never mind. I'll tell you later.
Okay.
I was looking up the difference between empires, corporations, coalitions, and alliances, and there actually is many differences. Holy shit, that's a lot of
I
people.
can- tell you
2013,
empire
the
and
pattern of
corporation
warfare in nullsec had been established as a constant state of conflict punctuated by larger-scale wars between alliances and power blocks, and in October of that year, a new war roiled to life once again as Goonswarm's Cluster Coalition, or CFC as it was known, was expanding. Andrew Broen writes, quote,
History of
the
the Great
Cluster
Wars.
Empire now mirrored eerily the dominion of the former Band of Brothers at its peak, save for the fact it was a bit larger and more stable. For only the third time in New Eden's history, half of the nullsec territories were controlled by a single organization of players united under a single ruler. As October 2013 came to a
Jeez.
close, it was already becoming clear that a new block-level war would soon begin. By now, few were even surprised, as it was clear that in some respects, EVE was in the midst of a forever war. The individuals that made up these alliances could not be destroyed, and neither could their very real animosity for one another, which was compounding through the years. End quote.
Jesus.
This animosity exploded in 2013 into what came to be known as the Halloween War. As the Russian coalition attempted to capture space in a border conflict, their allies in the CFC sent minor support, which quickly expanded into their entire supercapital fleet. Uniting to fight them, a massive group of nullsec players gathered under the name N3PL and prepared for war. For 3 months, the war raged until January 27, 2014, when an opportunity arose for the CFC. Due to a bug in the game's user interface, a bug in the servers, or a clerical error on the part of a player in N3PL, the payment required to maintain the sovereignty in the crucial staging system of BTAC R5RB failed, leaving an 8-hour window for them to assail the system before the Sino-jammers became active again, and no further capital stakes were brought by the
Sino-jammers.
attackers.
I
At
still
first, there was
don't know what
confusion,
that shit
but
is.
even if it was a trap, the leaders of the CFC accepted it for what it was, an opportunity to strike at their enemies, the likes of which they were unlikely to see again for the rest of the war. The call was made, and despite being off hours for the CFC, fleets were formed. Few had any conception of what was about to happen. Writing for Crossing Zebras, player Sindel Pelion wrote,
Oh my god, it's a
"The
fucking
reports
My Little
that were
Pony
coming in
avatar.
were saying that this
Yes,
was a
sir.
supercap fight. There was a lot of talk that it would not last that long. We just needed to drop TCUs again and try to regain control of the station. No one, not me, not anybody, could have known what the next 20-odd hours held." End quote. Together, the Cluster Coalition and the Russian Alliance gathered their fleets and jumped into the beachhead system of BTAC R5RB. On Twitter,
shit, now it's gonna be
Rogod Legend,
complicated
then
with the
leader of
wormholes.
founding N3 member Noli Secunda, wrote about what was happening from Denver Airport as the two fleets danced around one another non-committally.
Denver Airport.
Quote, "About 500 CFC players in system, all Dominic's battleships. N3PL jumped in Slowcats and Supercapitals off-grid. Dominic's warped to Caps, then changed mind and bailed. And now it's a face-off, waiting for the fight to start. All fleets are in system, but not on grid with each other." End quote. The commanders of both fleets knew the location of the other in the system, but nobody fighting could see anything except for their allies, waiting tensely with the bright nebulas surrounding them. The appearances of the fleets were dominated by the massive Avatar-class Titans, whose silhouettes were immediately recognizable and were the most common of any of the Titans. The onus was on the attackers, and so, Together, the CFC fleet warped to engage with the forces of N3PL. Given the amount of resources being invested in this battle, it was clear that if the goons could win this fight, then there would be nothing standing between them
deal with
and
it.
total control of Nullsec. But even before the first shots were fired, there was a complication. In 2011, a mechanic to compensate for lag in heavily populated battles had been introduced, called time dilation. When a server was faced with a load too heavy for it to handle, rather than simply allowing lag to impact gameplay, time in the region would be slowed to allow the server to process all of the data moving through it. But since time was only slowed in the immediate vicinity of the battle, reinforcements could arrive far faster relative to the damage being dealt.
Look at all those Titans.
Given that the passage of time
I guess
in
Titans were
RB had been slowed to 10% of real time, the slowest possible,
and now people
the battle
were getting
rapidly
richer, I
grew.
guess.
And given the strategic importance of the system, neither side was willing to concede. Images and video quickly made their way online, even as the battle was raging, showing a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes dominated by the dark shadows of the Avatar and Erebus-class Titans against a backdrop of blue interdiction bubbles, which locked every ship inside of them into combat. The rate of escalation only quickened as time passed and players in the Americas were able to log into the game and join the battle, which was still raging hours later. By this point, thousands of players had already participated. Compared to their enemies, the goons easily had more players in the Americas, and soon they outnumbered their opponents by a significant margin. After brawling for 12 hours, the final result was clear. The CFC would be the victors in this massive battle, which reportedly had over 7,500 participants at various points, with over 2,600
they're not even
of the
called the
system
goons anymore,
concurrently
right?
at its peak. This
No,
latter
they're
number
still-
had
yeah,
only
no,
been
they're still
eclipsed
goons.
by
No, they're called
another
the
battle
Cluster
involving the
Corporation.
CFC.
Yeah,
since
yeah.
They had smothered the Reddit-based Test Alliance in a battle involving
CFC, yeah.
4,070 concurrently, but the result of that battle was a foregone conclusion, fought more for fun than any other reason. Comparatively, the battle for BTAC R5RB was far more spontaneous, strategically vital, and uncertain. The question now was only how much N3PL could salvage. This number would prove far smaller than they hoped. Of the 72 Titans that they fielded, only 13 survived. Comparatively, the losses of the CFC were minuscule. Not only had the reserves of N3PL been broken, but so had their spirit during the 21-hour-long engagement. But from the outside, the conclusion looked significantly different. The introduction of Plex had given an approximate real-world exchange rate between in-game currency and real-world fiat currency, and when the damage was tallied and converted,
What?
the cost of the entire...
I told you he said fiat.
What is that though? So I guess they use the Plex like as
Currency, yeah.
yeah. But what is fiat?
For coalitions, there is two sides: the Clusterfuck Coalition and N3PL. Both going to be equally unfun. Blue donut. For alliances, there are way too many. I'm sure some will be along shortly to extol their virtues.
The introduction of Plex had given an approximate real-world exchange rate between in-game currency and real-world fiat currency, and when the damage was tallied and converted, the cost of the entire battle exceeded $300,000 US.
Damn,
This
girl.
number was immediately attractive to news outlets, who printed simplified versions of the story to their bemused readers while sheepishly referring to the Cluster Coalition only by their acronym. Now, the goons were left with the largest empire in the game and the media attention to make them the unequivocal masters of EVE Online, and they would soon come to embody that status in a familiar way. But while the goons were ascendant, the company that made the game they had mastered was struggling with their other game, and despite how desperately they wanted success,
Yo, is your
it
camera
seemed
on?
continuously to elude
Oh
them.
shit, hold on. Sorry,
All good.
got it.
Since its launch in 2012, Dust 514 had been struggling. While the game allegedly had players measured in the hundreds of thousands and its financial success isn't publicly known, it's almost certain that the company was dubious of the game's reception shortly after its launch. Many who had been excited for Dust were concerned from the beginning. The fact that it was a PlayStation 3 exclusive game severely hampered its growth, as most who were aware of EVE Online played games on their PC rather than a console. But perhaps more importantly, the PlayStation 3 was already nearing the end of its life cycle as Dust was being launched. Typically,
PS4
game
was coming
consoles
out.
have a limited lifespan due to the company's desire to create new consoles with updated hardware, and the first iteration of the PlayStation 3 had been released in 2006. This meant that, by the time Dust was released, the console was already 6 years old, and many were anticipating the release of a successor console in the near future. These expectations proved correct, as in February of 2013, less than a year after the release of Dust, Sony announced that the PlayStation 4 would be sold during the holiday season of that year. Frequently, console gamers will leave behind old consoles in favor of new ones quickly, and this meant that the future of Dust was in jeopardy. The game had
I wish I
originally
got
been
a
announced with a
PS4.
5-year development plan, and CCP's
I'll
Vice
make up
President
time
of
with
Business
PS5 though.
Development, Thor Gunnarsson, confidently
had two.
repeated these claims to gaming
PS4 had a
communities
really
in
good
Destructoid.
library.
Quote,
Yeah.
I
"We know that our
underestimated it.
fan base, Dust-curious players, are buying the PlayStation 3 to get into our game. What we hear anecdotally is that PS3 sales are increasing. Sony have done a phenomenal job of managing console transitions, like they did with the PlayStation 2's cost and size reductions. We can make the logical assumption that something similar will happen as the PlayStation 4 comes to market. If you look at the large third-party publishers, you'll see that Sony is not falling away from the PlayStation 3." End quote. The author of the article, Joseph Larray, added that, quote, "Still, CCP will eventually need to develop a PlayStation 4 version of Dust 514,
Fun fact, the
link it to
PS3 towards the
version,
end of
and then
its
tie
life
both of them to
actually
Tranquility,
outsold,
the London-based server that governs
the
everything
Xbox
that happens in
360.
the EVE universe, and they'll do it, ideally, with as
Yeah,
little
Sony.
downtime as
Yeah,
possible."
get 'em, Sony.
End quote.
I think it's
This
because
would
like
require
towards the end
even
of its
more
life it had like
development
pretty
time
good
and effort,
exclusives.
something that CCP were already struggling
Which
to
is
manage
weird, 'cause
after the
everyone had
failure
a
of Incarna
360,
and the death of World of Darkness. The game
I don't
itself
think the
was
library
rife
of the
with
PS3 was
issues
very
to
good,
which
though.
players consistently
game library.
referred as
You mean the
systemic
PS3?
and fundamental.
Yeah.
For example,
You said
players
PS2.
could game the EVE integration
I
by
meant
joining the
PS3.
opposite side and manipulating whether they won or lost, depending on what was more beneficial at the time, in order to acquire territory. Xander Fena, writing for Crossing Zebras in June of 2013, discussed his problems further in his article, The Tragedy of Dust 514, in which he states, quote, "Dust had definitely caught my attention, and before I knew it, I was hooked in the hype. 4 years later, I wish they had just scrapped the entire project altogether."
Jesus.
Throughout this article, Xander discussed many of the fundamental issues, including one of its main selling points, its connection to EVE Online. Quote, "The key feature at the release of Dust was planetary conquest. 1 month later, several of the major groups involved with it have announced they've pulled out or will not defend the districts they've taken. Planetary conquest, in a nutshell, took the worst aspect of EVE, structure grinding, and made it..."
Wait, hold on. That was okay, I was just reading about this planetary conquest. Anytime I looked up planets on the EVE wiki, it was just like planet colonization, and setting up like buildings on planets that you can't physically go to with your avatar, but it's for like mining solely.
Okay.
Their key feature. The other key feature that was sold directly to the EVE Online audience was the ability for EVE ships to orbital bombard planets. When the feature was first revealed at FanFest 2012, there was a lot of excitement. It looked and felt cool. A year later, the orbital bombardment mechanic has been watered down. There are no launch codes, and you're limited to both the class of ship and waiting for ground teams to accumulate a certain amount of war points before you can launch a strike. The novelty wore off very quickly, and the interest EVE side plummeted. There have been a lot of complaints within the Dust community that the links to EVE need to be drastically expanded in order to attract more players. I disagree wholeheartedly. The game itself will never sustain a community if there aren't drastic improvements to even the most basic gameplay. The links will be meaningless if the game itself is terrible, and developing it on both games will be entirely wasted if either game is suffering. EVE is in a pretty healthy state. Dust is on life support. Forcing interactions between the two when one game is in trouble is a disservice to the other." End quote. Despite the company's confident public rhetoric, it appeared less confident when, a year later in May of 2014 at EVE FanFest, CCP announced that they had begun development on a new first-person shooter game with the working title of Project Legion. This game would be developed
When will they
for the
learn,
PC,
dude?
in contrast to Dust's PlayStation 3 exclusivity. The opening of an article by Andy Kelly for
Wait, they
PC
said it was on
Gamer
PC?
made
They said it
clear
was?
the broad reaction
I
to
think
the
so, yeah.
announcement, notably referring to Dust 514 in the
Now we're
past
getting
tense,
closer to the
despite
modern
the
day.
fact that the servers were still online and, as far as the gaming public knew, development for Dust was ongoing. Quote, Dust 514 was a PlayStation 3 only FPS set in the EVE universe. Its limitations and flaws were obvious. Now, CCP are bringing a reimagined version of Dust to PC with a greater focus on community, customization, and emergence. It's an attempt to marry the free-form, story-generating magic of EVE to a modern multiplayer shooter. Dust 514 and Project Legion share a common DNA, but Legion is a very different experience, says Jean-Charles Godachon, executive producer. It's a competitive shooter that takes place in a sandbox that mixes PvP and PvP.
Hold on. Hold on. I just gotta show you this that I just found. Hold on. Fucking. What the hell?
What are you trying to do?
Why? There we go. Jeez. This. I looked up the battle that took place. It's listed as like a fucking like a real battle on Wikipedia, like a real war with belligerents, commanders, leaders, casualties, 16 Titans.
No, that's
15.
a lot of Titans.
That's so funny. Decisive CVC and Russian Alliance's victory. It was CFC versus Halloween Coalition, N3 Coalition, and Pandemic Legion. I don't remember how these guys formed.
They're called the Clusterfuck Coalition.
Yeah, that's what CFC is for. And then the Russian Alliance is just Halloween Coalition. I forgot how these guys formed though, but I just wanted to
I think they said it was like a group of corporations or something like that.
I guess the people that came from the Earth and Beyond game are like not even like a thing anymore. But
To my dogs.
yeah.
PvE. There's also a player-driven economy, which is really important. If you use the EVE name, you have to have an economy that's influenced by the players. It's all about loot, is how Godachon puts it.
Gotta have an
We're going to have
economy.
these sandbox areas, planets that you'll
Gotta have
drop
loot.
into, where you'll see other players and an ambient threat. In high-security systems, where Concord are present to protect you, it's more of a social place. Here you'll go looting with AI-controlled drones trying to stop you. End quote. Even if CCP were unwilling to admit it themselves, the message to players of Dust 514, EVE Online, and the rest of the gaming public was clear. To the company, Dust was a failure, and the only question that remained was how long it would be allowed to continue. In the meantime, CCP was also driving excitement for their new VR game, EVE Valkyrie, and much like their other games, the visuals were attracting immediate attention and building anticipation. With this game, CCP were again attempting to entice the general gaming public into the EVE setting of New Eden, where they had failed before with their various other materials. These perceived failures were cemented when, in October of 2015, it was announced that CCP Games was selling White Wolf to another game publisher, Paradox Interactive, known for their intricate strategy and simulation games, such as Crusader Kings, Hearts of Iron, Europa Universalis, and Mountain Blade. Despite these struggles, by the mid-2010s, EVE Online had more subscribers than at any other point in its history. While the subscriber count would rise and fall with the breath of warfare and peace, the overall trend was still positive, and even as players burned out on the game after long, brutal wars, many would inevitably return. Despite the lukewarm reception of many new features, the basic features of the game had seen continual improvement and well-received iterations, from server stability to graphics, and despite the age of the game and its poor new player experience, it continued to attract players due to its continual modernization. As it was, EVE Online still promised to provide CCP with continuous, reliable capital for the foreseeable future, and the company was intent on building out their library of games. And now that they had sold
We gotta make more shit than just fucking EVE,
building out
dude.
New Eden. This was reinforced by another release
it's a
from CCP titled
subscription-based game.
Gunjack, an arcade shooter for VR in which the player takes on the role of a gunner for a mining expedition in New Eden, protecting against pirates.
Gunjack.
While a relatively small release, it received positive reviews, but the mainstream gaming public seems to have spoken little about it. But as crowd control productions seem to be entering a new phase of their lifespan, so too was the world of EVE Online, defined largely by a single group of players whose clear ambition was to dominate all of New Eden.
I played that VR game. It was neat. Huh.
Yo, can we call it there? Would you mind calling it there?
Sure. Yeah, it's cool. We have section 20. Jesus.
How many sections are there?
28.
Okay.
Jesus
Alright, yeah.
Christ. Jesus Christ. I mean,
Dude.
it is definitely, this is definitely a game.
Definitely a video game.
This is definitely a video game, folks. We're not,
We're not gonna play it. Don't say it.
this is all just a prelude so we can play it finally at long last.
I'm just gonna build a bunch of ships to suicide bomb you over and over again.
That's just to spite me.
Yeah.
Just you made me play this.
The
Now-
only thing on our stream will be me killing myself and you. Over and over again.
I just want to show you, in a nutshell, how does this all work. When I first joined EVE, everything seemed pretty straightforward. You had a choice of 4 empires to choose from, and you choose one of those empires to fly with. You choose ships within the same empire. You stay in those empire borders. Since then, I've seen alliances, corporations, factions, etc. Watched a ton of in-game YouTube videos, including EVE's own homepage video, where I see ships from every empire faction all flying together, same group. Player corporations have almost nothing to do with NPC empires except in faction war, since last time EVE is owned by players. Now huge coalitions now watch over every activity and dictate what everyone gets to eat and how they play.
Eat?
You do what you
What?
you do what you want. The empire, in parentheses race, you choose has no bearing on what ships you can fly, what space you can go, what careers you choose. The things it affects is more storyline, where you begin and a couple hours worth of training during the tutorial. For example, you chose to start as a Mar after the tutorial. You begin to. Should also note that there are NPC corporations factions as well beyond the 4 empires, like the Cauldron Navy. Should also. Nuveen is indeed influenced by other players rather than the empires, which is what makes it such a unique game. Okay, so there's. Okay. So, I think what confused me is the fact that we become space truckers and Star Citizen. You fucking, how many space games have you played, Krillini?
Our Citizen hasn't come out yet, I thought. Or it's in like beta.
Oh, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I think that was the game that had like a gajillion dollars donated to it through Kickstarter, and it's still not out. It's like the most money ever generated. By fans.
Krillini says it has been out for a while, apparently.
Oh yeah.
So I guess I guess you're just a little liar, as it turns
Well,
out.
it definitely was like the most money generated by like a fan base for a game, like through a Kickstarter or whatever it was, like for development.
Apparently, Krillini says it's really fun. I think what confused me is that Fred said like the Empire, the Empire's in nullsec, and I thought nullsec was just
Wait,
like
the Empire is nullsec?
No. He was like, you can be a paramedic, trucker, militant trucker, naval office trader, literally anything. Okay.
Yo, let's do RP instead.
He was talking.
I want to be a.
So coalitions, alliances, and corporations are they started out as like player organized, but then I guess there are now NPC corporations and factions as well. But in the video, Fred said the Empire's in nullsec, which confused me because the Empires are only in high and low sec.
In nullsec? Well, there's like the corporations that existed in nullsec, like what the Band of Brothers and fucking
the Empires, I think he's using Empire as informally to describe the alliances in nullsec, because the Empires are only in Empire space. So I think he used it in an informal term, like a different term to describe. Like, yeah, sure, basically they're empires, but
if that's what he said, that's a little confusing.
That's what fucking confused me and what prompted me to look this up. Anyway, so we aren't streaming tomorrow because I gotta wait at the airport, and go to the airport. But we will be back Tuesday, hopefully, with more Dark Souls.
KK.
Trucker, yes, you are. It's vlog time. You want me to vlog picking up Marina at the airport?
I think that's a great idea.
That'd be so boring. Fuck, dude. I'm literally. I'm just gonna be playing.
Be him eating Cinnabon.
I'm literally just gonna be waiting in my car playing Fire Emblem. It's not very exciting. I would love to start streaming on fucking TikTok, because it's fucking
I would
easy.
love to stream a Cinnabon.
I would love to start streaming on TikTok, but I need 400 more followers, which is fucking stupid.
Oh, that's how that works? Oh, that's
you need 1,000 followers on TikTok to stream, which is funny because that's the same number you need on YouTube to start monetizing your content. So it's
We should start making like fucking like a bunch of TikToks. Like,
what do you think I've
did
been?
you know that in Pokemon Silver you can
Suck cock for living.
tell your mom to kill herself or something?
The best TikToks, the ones that get the most views, are just like people standing in front of their mirror and like saying like, "Hey guys, did you know the Holocaust actually happened? Crazy, right?" And meanwhile,
Just like memes, just garbage.
it's just like, meanwhile, like I take clips from the Twitch streams and make them like little funny videos. Some of them see success. The ones that get the most success are anything Kingdom Hearts related. It makes me mad.
We should go back and play the games we didn't play.
It's funny. I have the ability to do so now, like, because I have the Story Thus Far collection.
Well, that's only some of the games. Other than that, it's like the cutscenes.
Well, I could play Chain of Memories and Dream Drop, and
I would love to watch you play those games.
I really don't want
Mostly
to.
Dream Drop, because Dream Drop has a Pokemon thing in it.
God,
or Digimon.
How are we gonna do? We're gonna do Kingdom Hearts 4, but that's got to be like
100%.
you're gonna have
Maybe
to.
maybe I'll just watch you play it, or maybe
Yeah,
you'll watch,
or
maybe you'll watch me and Joe play it.
Yeah, or you're gonna have to come live with us for like a few weeks. I don't know.
So that we can play Kingdom Hearts. Yeah. Okay.
Like we just grind it out in like a week.
If we can find a way to monetize that, and I can quit my job, then fuck yeah.
Fucking no, come over to my place, dude. You live like farther than Luke is from me. The fucking way northwest. I mean, but if like once I get my citizenship, I can go all over. Did I say north? I meant fuck my Legos. I meant west, like hard west. For some reason, I thought Alberta was located like directly under the Northwest Territories, which aren't even considered provinces, are they? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Am I wrong? I'm just waiting for a response. I need to look at a map. Let's look at a map of Canada.
You told the boys that you can't stream tomorrow?
Yeah, I did. It is, but I'm like in the middle of Alberta. Oh, you are directly under. Okay. Oh, the Northwest Territories are. Because they have different governing bodies. Okay, yeah. Yeah. It's weird, though. Like that. Yeah, dude, you are like way farther out than like Luke is like somewhere down here. Fucking
Yo, dox me, please.
Hey, let's look at a map of North America real quick. I want to
I gotta take a shit. I'm leaving.
I just want you to see. Honestly, it's honestly like a similar distance. Oh wait, no, that's Florida. Never mind. Fucking, okay. We're gonna go, but we'll see you guys Tuesday.